Thank you. How do we get people? Say it again. Okay. I know, but we just, well, I gotta, I want to use this thing a little bit. All right, good. Good morning, everyone.
Okay, folks, we're going to get started now. If we could have everybody's attention, please. Okay, good morning, everybody. We need to get started. Thank you.
Well, I've never seen it.
Okay, folks, if we can bring it down to a dull roar here, please. Okay, here we go, folks. We are ready to get started. Thank you. We're going to turn things over to our esteemed chairman, John Sessler, who's going to kick off this morning's activity.
Thanks, Bob. Good morning, everyone. Before we start with today's educational sessions, we have a few housekeeping details to take care of. First, I'll start with a very brief summary of your association's activities over the past 12 months. It's been another busy year for AFI and another one that shows the value we all receive for being members of the association. Port issues took center stage for much of the year. While other associations backed off, AFI actively took steps to bring these issues to the attention of regulators, members of Congress, and anyone else who might be able to assist in some way. We've all received copies of the 2022 AFI Annual shortly. These are some good summaries of AFI's activities within the publication. AFI continues to serve as a valuable resource for all members, FDA, and other people in the food industry regarding the Foreign Supplier Verification Programs regulation as part of the Food Safety Modernization Act. A great example of people reaching out to AFI is that AFI President Bob Bauer was asked to serve on the task force that helped develop the training session for the Foreign Suppliers Verification Programs rule and continues to serve on that task force to provide valuable input on needed updates. When the pandemic hit and virtual offerings of the course were allowed, AFI was among the first to begin offering them and continues to offer monthly sessions. Bob has been the leading instructor for more than 10% of the people around the world who have taken the FSVP course, far more than any other instructor. It's surely recommended that all import firms have at least one employee take the course, which are offered by AFI. As you may recall, FSMA requires re-registration facilities during the last quarter of even-numbered years. So that means we will be going through this process in the fourth quarter of 2022. I encourage all domestic members to reach out to their foreign suppliers to name AFI as their agent with regards to FDA registration. It's a free service offered by AFI to all foreign companies that join the association. It helps foreign members because they not only have an agent, they have a source for ongoing information on everything related to exporting their products to the US. It helps domestic members because they know their suppliers have a reputable agent and a trusted source of information that will help them supply product that complies with the US regulations. These additional foreign members also help strengthen our association, something that benefits all of us. AFI efforts, of course, spread across many issues. AFI has been involved in such areas as anti-dumping and countervailing duty investigations on mushrooms, GSP renewal, seeking duty suspensions via the miscellaneous tariff bill, in addition to the research and promotion order and a standard of identity for olive oil. AFI staff and board of directors, while proud of the association's rich history, are constantly looking for ways to better serve members that in the present and also in the future. To have AFI go to even higher level, we continually discuss ways the organization can help members. To that end, the executive committee, full board of directors, and staff have developed and implemented a new strategic plan focused on continuing to address the needs of existing members and a concerted effort to grow the organization both financially and also to grow our membership. We need your help on this. As members, we're in the best position to speak to others about the value we receive through membership. That value can be enhanced through AFI becoming a larger organization because it gives us a lot more powerful voice. Just think of the growth we'd have if every person in this room participating online each brought one company onto the membership. AFI gives its members more opportunities to help guide the direction the association takes than most other organizations. We should take full advantage of these opportunities. Many of AFI's successes over the years have started with a member making what he or she thought was a minor point. So please don't hesitate to provide input to each other. Another way to help is to respond to AFI's requests for information. Responding to the surveys makes sure the staff and the board understand the concerns of membership. Of course, serving on a committee also helps a great deal and can be very rewarding. Before closing, I want to remind everyone to take advantage of the discounts available to AFI members, UPS, Hewlett-Packard, Office Max, and Dollar Rent-A-Car. Information on all the discounts is available on the AFI website. In 2021, members saved nearly $150,000. At this point, I'd just like to recognize, I think we should show a round of applause to Bob Bauer and Aaron Jordan for putting on this effort. Okay, we have a few business items to handle. The first item is a vote on a proposed update on the AFI bylaws. The draft was put together by the staff and a task force working on this issue and has been reviewed by and recommended for approval by the board of directors. Normally, we would provide a slide-by-slide document showing the proposed changes. However, given that AFI has been in existence since 1906 and past updates simply revise earlier versions of the bylaws, the law firm hired to assist us in this work recommended an entirely new document be created. Much of the content, however, is essentially the same. The primary reason for going through this process was to update the bylaws to allow the association to take advantage of advances in technology with regard to things such as virtual meetings and voting. Aside from the types of updates, the only significant changes in the creation of 2 advisory seats on the AFI board of directors, one each for the chairs of an overseas member and an associate American member. Okay. As required by the existing bylaws, the revised draft was sent to all the members this month. May I have a motion to approve the revised draft of the AFI bylaws? Have a second? All those in favor? All those against? Opposed? Okay. So moved. Okay. Okay, our treasurer isn't able to be with us this morning, so I'll present the treasurer's report. There are a lot of numbers here, so I'm just going to try and approximate, if that's okay. Ladies and gentlemen, my report covers the period of January 1 through December 31st, 2021. Revenue to AFI and its various sections of groups total 1.9 million and expenditures were 1.8 million. Revenue generated through the management of AFI totaled 840,000 and expenditures were 830,000, resulting in an increase of the fund balance by $10,000. The fund balance totals $740,000 at the end of the period. Income from membership dues for that period ended at $525,000. Revenue generated for the sections and groups totaled 1.1 million and expenditures were 1.1 million, resulting to an increase in the respective fund balances of $101,000. The fund balances for the sections and group totaled $785,000 at the end of the period. As in prior years, the expenditures were primarily related to promotional work and legal work. It is normal for the association to maintain a fund balance equal to 1 year's operating expenses to provide a healthy, stable association. AFI's fund balance ended roughly 89.2% of this prior year expenditures at the end of the period. AFI administers dedicated funds for the promotion and legal programs of various sections and groups. These funds are strictly for the purpose for which they were raised. They do not pertain to the assets of AFI and belong to the individual sections and groups. Financial reports are submitted to the board of directors for its information and review. They are also presented to the sections at their annual meetings. The certified public accounts of Lawson, Racino and Shibble and Associates produce annual and semi-annual financial statements for AFI and its group and sections. That concludes my report. Thank you. Now, let's see what's next. I have to approve the treasurer. Okay, may I have a motion to accept the treasurer's report?
Me and my mother, and then he never mentioned her. That was
All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. So moved.
We just
Thank
need
you.
people participating on Zoom to mute themselves, please.
That was not sat down. I don't want to accept.
Okay, so I guess at this point, would Brent Danielson come forward to present the nominating committee's report?
All right, I'll be giving the AFI nominating committee report. Serving on the nominating committee with me was Jim Bianco and Steve Mandia. The nominating committee places the nomination as officers of the association for re-elect for one-year terms. For chair, John Sessler. First vice chair, Karima Azoui. Second vice chair, Phil Meldrum. Treasurer, Rob Pollock. And secretary, Douglas Lynch. No other candidates have been put into nomination in accordance with the procedures and set by the bylaws. Therefore, may I have a motion to close the nominations and elect these candidates by acclamation. Okay. So moved, seconded. All in favor? Opposed? All right, the nomination committee also places the nomination for election of the board of directors for 3-year terms, which is Fred Martati, Orlando Foods, Steve O'Mara, J.F. Braun, and Waji Rekik of CHO America. No other candidates have been put into motion in accordance to and set by the bylaws. Therefore, may I have a motion to close nomination and elect these candidates by acclamation. So moved. Seconded. All in favor? All right, opposed? All right, that concludes the report for the nominating committee. Thank you.
Okay, we have one last piece of business. Jim Libby served 2 one-year terms as AFI chairman during a unique time, helping guide the association to the first year plus of the pandemic. Since we couldn't thank him publicly because both conventions during this tenure were held virtually, I asked Jim to come forward to receive a plaque thanking him for his service to the association. Jim? You can speak for about an hour if you want.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
It was a privilege. And I think the AFI again deserves considerable acclaim for keeping an amazingly active profile during the pandemic. And I thank every board member who stood with me in this, well, miserable period to keep us going and doing our good work in that time. Thanks again. Appreciate it.
And then Jim, part of this thing that John wasn't even aware of, I also get the opportunity as the chairman finishes his or her term to present something, token of my thanks. So since I wasn't able to do it,
Pleasure working with you in every way. Thank you. Yeah, there you are. Thank you, everybody.
yeah, John thinks he's looking forward to it, but that was actually the last time we're planning to do that. So. All right, so it's a pleasure to continue our trip around the world kind of thing, to bring up one of the most polite people, I think, on the planet. Somebody everybody loves to get to talk to. So Lassani from Ivory Cashew, please come up and join us.
Thank you, everyone. Full disclosure, I have 5 hours of material, but I was strongly advised by Erin to stay within 5 minutes. I'll try. I promise. It's an incredible honor to be with you this morning. And before anything, I would like you to give an applause to the tremendous leadership. Sorry, can you hear? Yes, better. Okay. All right. For the help and the assistance and the resources they provided us and allowing us to be here. And it's a great honor to be in front of you for this prestigious forum and to be with Ivory Coast, to focus, feature Ivory Coast as an international focus. And we are very honored and grateful for that opportunity, and especially also for the cashew of Ivory Coast, showcasing the cashew of Ivory Coast. So you could see our appreciation by the size and the quality of our delegation. We are here, the full delegation led by His Excellency, Mr. Ibrahima Touré, Ambassador of Cote d'Ivoire to the United States. Excellency Ambassador Inza Kamara, the Delegate General of the Services of Economic Promotion of the Ivory Coast for the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And Honorable Dr. Adama Coulibaly, the Director General of the Cote d'Ivoire Cotton and Cashew Council. Also with Mr. Karim Berthe, who is the Director of Processing for the Cotton and Cashew Council. And also the tremendous team of Ivory Cashew, led by a Queen Mother, Dr. Kelly. Well, I have to stay in the confine of my time. As I promised, we prepared a short video highlighting the tremendous work that is underway in the cashew sector, led by Dr. Adama Coulibaly, as well as the economic and social development underway currently as we speak in Cote d'Ivoire. And please, for me.
Second here. Thank you so much. Though. Get this in where it should be. Thank you so much for everybody from the Ivory Coast for being with us and influencing our convention. I've had a wonderful experience in the Ivory Coast about 3 years ago, and I can't wait to get back. And so thank you again, Ms. Chen, and your whole team.
That's the extent of his dedication to you and the law for AFI to have recognition. And I think that's. Thank you.
Okay, a couple things. Aaron and I really appreciate the thanks that we received publicly from John, but we'd be remiss not to mention the others in the office that have been doing a lot of work as well. So we want you to know it's just not us. In fact, Ed Spader is giving up this Saturday morning to be behind the scenes, seeing where I screw up on Zoom and texting me on that. So we obviously thank them. We know you do as well. One of the points I like to make a lot of times is the value our associate members bring to the table in guidance and connections and things like that. So I wanted to, I asked Michael Coffin to do us a favor and introduce our next speaker because it was through Michael that we were put in touch with the speaker. And so I thought it was apropos that Michael come up and introduce him. So, come on up, Michael.
Good morning, everybody. You can hear me? Okay. The first thing I'd like to say is thank you very much to all of you because 30 years ago, roughly, Alan Karanis suggested that after I wrote his insurance at Overseas Food Trading, he suggested that I join the AFI. And I think I've been here every year for 30 years. If I missed one, I apologize. It was one of the best pieces of advice I've ever had in my business life. We're now members of 5 different food associations, and we go to conferences, and I've got a great sidekick in JJ Van Amen. And I just want to say thank you to all of you. All right. The next thing I want to say is that over a lifetime, you start to learn, the quality of people, and you make them part of your team, or you really start to value resources. The gentleman I'm going to introduce, I recognize right away. I met him on a claim, a product recall claim for one of my longtime insureds. By the way, I still write Overseas Foods, by the way, 30 years later. Anyway, we met Joe Bermudez about 4 years ago. And I was so impressed with what he was doing representing an insurance company, essentially, because he does both. He can represent a customer and he can represent a carrier. I had to know him. We've made him part of our relationships. We depend on him, and it was my idea. I have some good ones sometimes, to bring him here to meet all of you. This will be a gentleman that you would want to talk to if ever a problem happens with your products. So with no further ado, Joe Bermudez of Stuart Smith is going to come up here and talk to you. I invite you to hit him with questions. Is nothing he won't be able to respond to. Joe Bermudez.
Come back up in a second.
Good morning, everyone. Great to see you, especially on a Saturday morning. I know how tough it can be to get up in midweek, let alone on a Saturday. So thank you for being here. And it's great to be in front of such a prestigious audience today. So I greatly appreciate it, and we greatly appreciate your time. And hopefully this is one of Michael's better ideas. I've heard some of them gone south, so hopefully this one doesn't. Now, I am an attorney, and I specialize in crisis management. And so what we're going to talk about today is some of the things that we've been dealing with, especially over the past couple of years, supply chain disruptions. And we're going to focus on, with respect to crisis management, how a crisis management event can hit all of your companies, hit your supply chains. Now, a lot of times it's not your fault. A lot of times it comes out of left field, as they say here in the States, basically comes out of nowhere, and suddenly you're dealing with a crisis that can end in the economic death of your company. And I've seen it plenty of times. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of identifying one of those crisis management events, as we call them, talk about what some of the issues are, talk about how frustrating it can be, and talk about how you can be prepared or better prepared for when this eventuality will happen. So one of the first things I want to talk about is, again, what happens in regards to a crisis management. And this one, the one we're going to talk about today, is one that deals with a defective product. It can be contaminated. It can have maybe ingredients that it's not supposed to have in there. It can deal with something that in regards to a pesticide that's not approved by a certain country or certain country's regulators. And those are all things that suddenly happen no matter how good you are. So what we're talking about is a bad day. And I put it that way, not to make it light, but because of the fact that it's something that we can all understand, having a bad day. And I'll give you an example. I was coming over to the hotel today. It's a rainstorm. There was a race outside my hotel. I had to go through 4 Uber drivers to get here. All right. And I started an hour and a half ago, right? A mini crisis, but it's a bad day. And what happens is we all have bad days, either as individuals or as companies. What happens when that individual that you rely on to do an audit, to do a check on a quality issue, and they're having a bad day, they're having a mini crisis at home, and they don't do their job the way they normally do, their fantastic job, and suddenly there's a problem. And you get a phone call, whether it's from a regulator, whether it's from a customer, or sometimes from the media. And they're calling you to tell you you've got a problem. And at that moment, you're not sure exactly how big or how small it is. Now, one of the things I do want to basically impress on all of you, as Michael said, this should be a conversation. I don't mind talking, and I can sit up here, as the gentleman said earlier, I could be here for 5 hours and talk. But I want you to ask me questions as we're going along, saying, what do you mean? Or could this happen? Or if you've got other questions about it, but please ask me questions, because I always prefer interactive, and I think the audience learns a lot more when it is interactive. So like I said, you get this phone call and they're saying, and you say, I'm sorry, what did you say? You have a problem with your product, your food product. Unexpected. And this hits all along. Every single entity in the supply chain. It is not focused on just the manufacturer or the distributor. It hits the brokers. It hits the retailers. And so you don't know where this is going to come from. But when it hits, you need to be prepared. And the reason why you know it's bad is because I promise you, 5 minutes into it, you're going to wish it was ancient history. And a lot of companies do. And some companies, that's the end of their history. So the first thing I'm going to get back is, and this is what usually happens when I talk to clients, and I'm talking about preparation. Oh no, we're great. Never going to happen to us. We never have a problem. And you are great. That's why you're here. That's why you're building business. You're fantastic at what you do. But so are all those companies on the FDA, the USDA, and the CPSC websites. They're all fantastic as well. But every single day, we now see a class 1, which is the toughest class you can get. I mean, it's when you get class 1, like winning the gold medal of recalls. And so when you get class 1, it's a problem. It's a big problem because it means it's going to harm people. And when that happens, these folks don't joke around. When it's a class 1, they are going to be up, down, all over you. If you've had an annual exam with your doctor recently, kind of the same thing. And so it's not anywhere near pleasurable, and it can take anywhere from a few days to several months to be done with it. And what does that mean to you? What it means, if you're the CFO, the CEO, anyone in the C-suite, you've got tough times ahead, and you've got employees who you are now going to rely on to basically do 2 jobs. Their day job, trying to keep your effort going, keeping it afloat, or you're still trying to deal with the recall. And suddenly you've got a bunch of new best friends. First, you're going to be calling a crisis consultant. You don't have them on retainer. Guess what? It's okay, because they will be happy to help you. But because you didn't prepare ahead of time, you're going to pay a lot of money for that. One of your new best friends should be your insurance broker. Why? Because there's a good chance that you bought the right insurance if you have the right insurance broker, and that you can get coverage for this. And I'm going to explain to you in a couple of slides why that's so important. Because I promise you, you're sitting here now thinking about, well, wait a minute. Even if I had a recall, it would be this, we'd limit this, we'd stop this, we'd catch this. It'll only be about so much money. I can tell you right now, based on my interviews with clients over the past 20 years, you've underestimated that amount by a factor of 10. I promise you. You have no idea how this is going to come back to you. And so one of the others is, of course, the lawyer. Now, we're fantastic. Although we're cockroaches, we're everywhere. And you have to deal with us. And we are expensive. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. I'm not that expensive, but a lot of them are. So don't go with them. But you're also going to need a forensic accountant. Why is that? Because I'm going to go through some of the loss items for you. And you're going to want to work with your accounting team or accountant to be prepared to deal with these issues. It's the one area that every company seems not to think about until it's happened. Then suddenly you're trying to figure out where all these losses are coming from, trying to figure out how you're going to estimate them, trying to figure out how you're going to get monies, because you may be shut down for a bit, for a long time, trying to figure out where you're going to get monies to pay off customers that are complaining, the suppliers who want their monies. I promise you, a crisis management event. I don't know if you remember, just off the coast here, 2 years ago or several years ago, the BP incident. Remember the CEO said, "Gee, I really would like to be on my sailboat." They gave him his wish. Okay, and he was right. It's not an easy thing. When everyone comes to you for answers, and we're going to go through that in a minute, it's tough to deal with because you've got so much going on. And then you have the regulators. Now they are fine people. And I say, if you're a Harry Potter fan, the Dementors, okay? They're not all soul-sucking individuals. No, they actually have a great role to play. But they, when it's a class 1 recall, which means it's the highest in regards to the potential for harm or death involved with a food product, they mean business. They don't play around. And so they are going to become your new best friend. And they can be there for weeks. If they think there's an issue with your facility, they can be in there for weeks looking at things. And depending on what you can do, even with FSMA being around as long as it has now and been enacted since 2011, we still have issues. And we still have, I'm just dealing with one now, where a company had a 3rd visit from the FDA. And each visit started with 4 weeks and 5 weeks, 6 weeks of having FDA individuals in your facility looking at everything. It's not a fun time. And of course, you will be asking, when is this going to end? And hopefully it ends at a point in time when you're able to basically still say, let's just put that in ancient history. Let's carry on. We'll never speak of it again. Now, this is an absurd question here. Does anyone speak foreign language? Let me ask you this. Does anyone speak 2nd, 3rd, everyone, right? I mean, pretty much everyone here speaks another language, correct? Okay, that's great. How many of you speak FDA? I know it's a joke, but if you aren't on the same page as your regulator, it's not going to go well. It's kind of like if you've ever had a conversation with a forensic accountant. They're talking to you about blah, 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 this, that, and the other, and you're looking at them going, I have no idea what you're talking about. Can't you just do 2 + 2? It's the same thing with your insurance. If you've done the work ahead of time, if you've sat down with your experts and gotten the right insurance, you call them and say, we've got a problem. Just been told we've got a contaminated product. We've just been told we have a product that isn't smelling well. We've got an issue. And this product is not only sold in retail stores by itself, it's incorporated into a number of other companies' products. You're looking at millions of dollars in losses unless you bought the right insurance and you call your translator and say, hey, broker, Michael, JJ, you've got an issue. I need you to go to the insurance company and speak to them about what they're going to talk to you about in regards to the loss. And they're going to say, well, there are limits and it's excluded, and you're, whoa, 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 what? I didn't read that thing. Who reads your insurance policy? No one. Okay, I don't read the insurance policy. You must get paid to, but I don't read those things. Same thing with your contracts. You want to make sure your contracts are protecting you both ways. So that when there is a bad day, whether it's your fault, whether it's someone else's fault, or no one's fault, a lot of times you cannot figure out what's happened. How did this come about? We don't know, but we do know we have a problem. And you want to make sure your contracts are there to protect you in that regard, so that you'll survive this. This is all about survivability. It has nothing to do with pride. You are fantastic. You are great at what you do. No ifs, ands, or buts, but you cannot stop this. You can't see it. You don't know when someone in your team is going to have a bad day. You can't stop it. So what you need to do is figure out how to respond to it. And the first ones who are going to call you about it are your customers. And they're going to get on the phone and say, hey, we just figured out that you have a problem with this product. And your thoughts go to, okay, how are we going to appease? And then the next thing is, how many other customers are about to call us? And if you've ever been in this space, if you've ever dealt with this issue, they don't tend to give you, hey, we'll call you back in 6 months and you can pay us back for all the losses. It doesn't work like that. You're going to get an email, probably within a week, saying, hey, by the way, we figured out what the numbers are. This is how much it cost us today because you had a bad day. We had a bad day. Here's what our bad day cost us. And they send it to you. And suddenly you get a few of those emails. You get phone calls. And then you get the lawyers because you know they had to show up. And the lawyers say, based on your contract, based on what you did in regards to the production of this food product, you owe us a whole lot of money. We'll give you 20 days to pay. We'll give you 30 days to pay. And if you're dealing with our rather large friends at like Costco or Walmart, and you have a bad day with them, the clock is ticking. They've made you a big deal. They liked your product. They said, hey, bring us more, bring us more. And you do. You go out and open up a new facility, a bigger facility, because you are going to make all kinds of money with your new best friend until the day it goes wrong. And suddenly your new best friend, which is now 90% of your clients, is saying, you might be off the shelves for about 6 months. You run down the hallway to go talk to your accountant saying, what's that going to mean? Why are you leaving? Don't pick up your bag. Where are you going? But that's essentially what happens. Your customers are going to call you and ask you what's happened and how are you going to make it right? And then you get the suppliers. Hey, we heard. Now this is even, and believe me, this happens even though you haven't even hit the FDA board yet. It's amazing how word of mouth suddenly transfers around your supply chain, and your competitors are aware of it as well. And they're thinking, oh, they're having a bad day? That's a shame. Let's go see, we've lost sales to blank, blank, blank. Let's go have a visit. Let's go talk to them about it. Let's go see what's going on. Maybe we can jump in. And they will. The very first issue I ever dealt with back in 2005 was a small company like that. Owned by the father, gone on for decades, Sun takes over, they decide to open up a new facility, a larger facility. They had a problem. The FDA came in, shut them down for a month. By the time they were back up and running again, they were DOA, dead on arrival. They were done, gone. The son who had become the CEO and taken over the company, now selling candy, the vending machines. This happens, and I've seen it. It was my very first instance of what the reality is with respect to these issues. When your suppliers start calling and saying, hey, we're on a contract, we're about to make another delivery, we can do that, right? We're not sure because we're not producing right now. We're trying to figure out what happened. We may have to shut down for a few days and clean the entire facility. You'll do it once. You'll take a run. You may have to shut it down again because not everything went the way it was expected to. It can take a lot of time. And this has nothing to do with how great you are. It's called friction, and it happens in anything and everything, and especially happens with respect to food supply chains. So it does take time. And then you get the media. Says, hey, you understand that your food product got someone sick. Now you're thinking about, oh boy, bad publicity, adverse publicity, as we call it. Is there coverage for that? There is actually. Can you get someone who lost it back? You can. Do you have to deal with your young daughter's questions at dinner when you get home that day? Because you've had enough, right? You've been dealing with this issue all day long. You get home, you sit down dinner, and your daughter goes, hey, Dad, I heard. Hey, Mom, you look ragged. What's going on? And you're like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I've talked about it all day long. This is the new reality for you, and it will be a reality for you. It happens to every single company. Now, what is the impact in regards to on the financial or the economic scale? Here's part of it. Here's what you're going to be dealing with. You're going to be talking to a whole bunch of different people. We're going to want to know what happened, how it happened, and they're trying to get to the root cause. If you can, it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes it remains a mystery. You can survive that, but it takes a whole lot to get past it when you can't figure out what the root cause is. Here are some of the expenses you're going to be dealing with. Now you look at that and you say to yourself, well, wait a minute. And by the way, this is from my friends Baker Tilly, who are specialized in this space. This is what they do every single, like myself, every single day. This is what we deal with. And you're looking at those numbers saying, oh, what's the big deal? In regards to numbers. And those numbers are big. Take a look at these. Think about that. Think about that for a period of time. What would happen if you lost business income? You have to go make product now and replace it and make sure it comes back and gets back to your customer because they're screaming at you. I've got contracts. I've got delivery dates. You've got to get me the product now. So you're asking your team to not only do their day job, but now they've got to go back and remake stuff. And you're asking them to do this. And remember, when you rehab, the first time around. It's not getting back to that. So now you spend all that money in that regard. Not to mention the fact that you're not getting any income. It's gone. And you could be losing it for the next few months. Like I said, if your customer, especially a retail customer, says you've lost the shelf space, how are you going to get that back? Thanks for sharing. We really appreciate your ingredients, but we've gone to so-and-so because they haven't had a recall in the past 2 years. We're going to stick with them now. How are you going to get those monies back? How are you going to keep things going? How are you going to pay your employees? How are you going to pay your suppliers? How are you going to compensate? All because someone had a bad day. All because someone didn't catch something. All because your supplier sent over something that was contaminated. They didn't pick it up. And like I said, it's not necessarily an at-fault thing. Sometimes it's just a bad crop. Someone did the wrong thing, didn't realize it. The next thing is passed on to the supplier. And your stuff. Now, how do you get ready for this? How do you say, hey, let me make sure I'm not running over time for you. But how do you get ready for this bad day? How do you deal with it? The first is, like I said, talk to your experts, who will then be your translators. Talk to your insurance folks, say, how do I get ready for something like this? And go through it with them. Go through what that bad day. Look at your customer base. Look at your supplier base. How are they going to react? How are you going to react? How are you going to respond to all of this? With respect to management, sit down, draw out a plan. Get an expert, help you do that. It's the same way as you do, right? You need someone in the facility, in the team, expert up from the outside, to make sure that under FISMA, you have everything wrapped up, ready to go. And you can see exactly how you go through the process. And all risks are analyzed and ready. Same thing here. Up the game plan. Understand who's going to do what. Because you need to delegate. One person cannot handle all of it, I promise you. I've been on those phone calls where the CEO is screaming about what to do. Because he or she is not prepared. And now they're asking, what are we to do? Realizing he's not here. We had a trail mix issue with a company. Great company, great product. And they were delivering their product every day. A big old company with big buildings. And they realized that one day they were told, we may have rocks that came in with the owner. That's it. And so suddenly they've got to realize and deal with calling up the big W and saying, we may have a problem. This CEO understood completely what that meant. And he was trying to deal with it. And I mean, literally screaming on the phone. He asking us, requesting, tell me what to do. Hey, big guy, this is why you get the bucks. It's your decision. You have to decide what to do. We can't tell you what to do. No one can. And that's the reality facing you when this day hits. So when you're ready, when it does hit, you'll be ready, right? Because you're going to get your management team together and say, okay, who's going to do what? Who's going to handle the fire? Who's going to handle the customer? Who's going to handle operations? Who's going to talk about doing what? If there is media, who's going to be the point person? If you don't have those people in your team, I promise you, what you will do is can just shut down part of it without shutting down the entire operation. If you cannot understand what that means, how quickly can you respond? How quickly can you get things done with maybe another contract manufacturer while you're trying to figure out what you're doing? Take a look at all those different options and prepare to implement them when it time comes. And this is the aspect that no one ever talks about. The accounting team. Make sure they understand what they're going to need to do and what they're going to be dealing with when this day hits. They really have to learn how to drop and roll. They have to learn and be ready for the fact that they're going to be doing two jobs. In the morning, they work on the regular job, doing all the accounting stuff that they normally do. In the afternoon, they have to shift over and figure out what they're doing with the suppliers, what you're doing with the customers, and how you're going to make it all work. Do you need that extra line of credit? And how are you going to explain to the bank that it's just a blip? We're going to get past this. Give us more money. We are a good investment. They don't usually look at you that way when you've told them that you have a problem, when you're having a bad day like this. So be prepared. It's easy to do. It will cost a little bit, but I promise you it's a lot less than having to deal with, oh boy, we have a problem, folks, and now we need to figure out how to deal with it. And everyone's scrambling because they are not prepared. Thanks so much, everyone. I appreciate your time today.
Any questions anybody has for Joe?
All right, I've done my job. Well, thank you
All right.
again. Appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, some good advice there. I keep thinking of this Honeymooners episode. Ralph gets told by the doctor, you gotta calm down, so when you get upset. So pins and needles and pins and happy and something like that. So he gets home and his wife and neighbor Norton are talking, they're afraid to tell Ralph about a rent increase. So Ralph comes in, hey, I'm so excited, pins and needles. I just wish I had something to get me upset. Try this on for size. Well, hopefully nobody has to deal with what Joe was talking about for now. So we will move on to our next speaker here. There's no room to move this mouse on here. Just a sec.
So that's two people to go to the airport, and he wanted to take a picture before he leaves. The ambassador needs, one of the ambassadors needs to go to the airport. If you have time, and then back with support picture as well. Okay.
Should do the track. Did the same thing before, it should be kicking on. I think do it over there.
That's this one.
Now. Yeah, it's one of the. Shit.
Plug it and hit the power for 25 minutes.
Just- It's not showing. Backdrop. It's not showing what's on.
So this, okay, so.
Yeah.
Multiple screens on here.
I think that's happening again.
Yeah, because you're showing this.
Yes. Yeah.
Right click on this and say display options.
That's what I was looking for.
Yeah. And then make sure that you only have one screen. Just maybe say two. Let's see what happens. Okay, so this is screen one. That's screen two. That's screen two. So you can- Yeah, don't do that.
I know where Aaron went. The AV person.
You have two things. What is this? That's the HDMI also, right?
It is, but it should be.
It's two HDMI.
No, that's a USB.
So that's display two.
There's no room on that side.
Right click, do display setting.
It says that Windows plus P. And maybe it's saying
Let's
setting
do
something.
duplicate these displays.
It says you need to duplicate the screen.
Right,
Yeah.
but duplicate the displays. Here, now you get.
It's showing up now.
It's just PowerPoint showing up. It's gonna be one of these things.
It is. She wanted the different view.
It won't go into that mode?
No.
Oh,
Try
Like-
one more time. Stop share. There's no room to operate. It's killing me.
we got this. Keep it down. There, now we go back to the. Do you want me to get a piece of paper just to put it down, just to see if it'll recognize it? And so you can't just click on that one? It doesn't. How weird. Okay,
First, let me try something else, and then I feel let me go back to it.
that's so strange. Slideshow.
I'm gonna try to open it all. Let's get totally out of PowerPoint.
Yeah, I mean, if I have to do it that way, then I can do it, it'll be fine. But that's so weird that, well, that's like a normal presentation. Yay. Okay, perfect. And then can we get that out of the way?
This will be, we're on Zoom.
Okay, maybe we can put that up in the corner. or something. Can we get that to shrink though? Usually you can get it to lift, you know what I mean? Like to get it out of the way.
I don't know why.
Usually I just like
Looks like come out of
click
it.
next to it and then it kind of moves up. No, I guess not. All right. That's okay. Shoot. Yeah, I wish we could shrink that thing. That bar.
Never had that issue before.
I want to get rid of the bar because it's going to block the slides.
Any other time I've done it, you come out of the screen.
Yeah, and it kind of goes up by itself.
Click on there. Good more. Might be minimized.
Hide floating. I saw something. Hide floating meeting controls. Yay. Okay. Woohoo. Okay, no, now we're all good.
Okay, so we had the unscheduled breakdown. We apologize for the technical difficulties. Computer and machine stopped talking to one another. All right, so our last speaker was recommended by an associate member. This speaker came highly recommended from an importer member. Somebody who saw her speak at the PTMPA conference. So Susie Badaracco is the president of Culinary Tides, which helps food industry partners navigate trends by revealing. Okay. Susie's the president of Culinary Tides, which helps food industry partners navigate trends by revealing relevant patterns so they can create products that connect with customers. Susie's been practicing trend intelligence and predictive forecasting for nearly 20 years. Using these techniques, she's been able to successfully predict and profile government, technology, adversary, and ally in food, flavor, consumer, industry, and health trends. She's here today to offer strategic thinking to help navigate food industry trends for 2022 and beyond. So belated welcome to Susie Badaracco.
Okay, hello, I'm going to speak super fast to try and catch us up a little bit. And I'm not that tall. There we go. Can you guys all hear me in the back? All right. And by the way, you are welcome to the presentation. I'm sure they'll give it to you in PDF, but if you want to, just give me your card and I'll make sure you get the presentation. So don't worry about taking 1,000 notes at all. All right. Now it doesn't want to advance. Let's try. Really? It's actually not advancing. Now it's not advancing. Help me. We got it up. I was trying those. And if it has to be in the other mode, that's fine.
Okay.
Like whatever's easier. Oh, wait, you did something. What did you do?
I'm not sure.
Oh, is that me? Oh, we got it. Okay. Oh, we're back.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, this is so silly. Okay, so just a tiny bit about who the heck we are. And by the way, if you did see us at the last conference, this is a totally new speech. So as a trends forecasting company, there's a handful of us out there. We kind of sit, we're all in the same playground, but we sit over by the swings, and the Mintels, Nielsen's, Technomics, they all sit over by the slides on the other end of the playground. Because what we do is we don't show up your mailbox. We don't do one-off reports to sell to the whole industry. We actually partner in with our clients year in and year out as their own private think tank. And so that's how we lock in with our clients. The other difference with what we do is my background is military intelligence and chaos theory. So 1,000 years ago, I was a criminalist. So I did crime scenes. I was a drug toxicologist. I trained with FBI in LA, and then I trained with Scotland Yard when I was 19 in London for serial killers specifically. So when you do that kind of a job, they'll test you in certain parts of military. They test you for pattern recognition because you can see if you're standing over a dead body. It'd be helpful to know if you knew someone who could recognize patterns like that. Only 4% of the population are called natural pattern recognizers. I turned out to be one of them, which is how I got to play with serial killers. So after I decided to stop stepping over dead bodies, I naturally went to culinary school. So I am a certified chef, and I went back again later for my master's in human nutrition. So I am also a registered dietitian on top of it. I made the cataclysmic mistake at some point of getting out of the food industry and going to work for the USDA for 2 years. It turns out I do not belong in government. So when I got back into the food industry, a think tank out of Tokyo picked me up, and they knew my original background. And so they're the ones that said, instead of tracking serial killers, track cereal bars. I was like, I totally know what you mean. So it took me about a year in the think tank to turn the analytics on their head, the military analytics I was used to, instead of staring at a human, to stare at a corporation or a trend instead. And so what our team does, so I've had my company now for 17 years. And so what we do is we literally look at patterns in chaos to aid strategy, which is why we link in as a private think tank for all the clients and whisper in there all throughout the year. So what we specialize in is foretelling a trend's birth and then forecasting the trajectory, personality, and longevity. So it does not matter if you know what the trend is. If you don't know where this thing is going, where it came from, how long it's going to last, and what kind of personality it has, you're going to guess at how to navigate it. So our forecasts all throughout the year for our clients are used for entrance, navigation, and exit strategy. So you all are dealing with a dozen trends on your playground every day, but they're all at different points in their life cycle, and that's why we have to watch all of it at the same time. So where we fit tends to be with, doesn't matter the department, it's really with whoever is responsible for pushing this information out to the rest of the organization. That's where we tend to sit. Okay, so there's a great little saying in the intelligence community. It's called information analyzed equals intelligence. And by the way, we deal with foresights, which is another end of intelligence. It means we're looking at what doesn't exist yet. So there are 3 types of analytics. And I'm going to walk you through the 3 so you understand what the rest of the slides actually mean. Otherwise, we'll all be lost. The first one is called linear forecasting. So when you're doing strategy, linear forecasting is every report you've ever seen in your life. I promise you, it's called linear. And what that is they use quantitative data, of course, for this kind of reporting, and then they use business intelligence models. So they'll use like pie charts, line charts, bar graphs, to ask whatever questions they have. So what they'll do is, let's say there's a report on snacking. They'll go out and they'll get a survey on snacking, and then they'll look at sales research on snacking, and voila, you have a linear report. So what linear can't do is it can't forecast a new birth. It also can't explain where that trend came from. It can't cross-analyze unrelated topics or foresee any kind of upcoming changes because it's math-based. They're asking one question at a time. So it's considered static in the intelligence community because it can't see future influences. So it will give you a forecast, right? It'll say snacking will be $5 billion in 5 years or whatever the forecast. And what it's doing is they draw a straight line. So they say if snacking's here, in 5 years, it'll be up here. And that's why it's called linear forecasting. Its other nickname is called straight line forecasting. So it's good for tracking, but we can't actually use it for forecasting. And these are the sort of charts you would see, in every report you've ever seen in your entire life, right? The next one is chaos. AI. AI is everybody's darling. I hate to tell you, AI is linear on steroids. So it has the exact same problems. It uses quantitative data. They use statistical models. The difference is you've programmed it, right? Someone has programmed it to go look for stuff so you can get on with your life. So it has the same problems. In many instances, it can't search natural language. It can't look at new situations. It can't cross-analyze unrelated topics. And my group actually works with the Learning Computer Center at MIT. That's how we know this. It can't look at abstract reasoning. Above all, it can't search unclassified data, which is why AI can never find a new birth, because it's not looking for one. And above all, it has no reason or no common sense. So when it gives you a forecast, it's called black box forecasting because even the computer programmer has no idea where the program came up with its idea. So you have a 50-50 shot of heading off a cliff. So that's also why military would never use this. It's considered static. It can't consider future influences. So good for tracking, not for forecasting. Why would I bring up guinea pig names, you wonder? Because I volunteer at guinea pig rescues. So what we did was we worked with MIT Learning Computer Center, learning computers, and they had just done a project with My Little Pony to come up with My Little Pony names for the toy industry. So we said, could you do it for guinea pig names? Because we're dealing with dozens of guinea pigs. And they're like, absolutely. So this is what the computer did to tell you what AI does. It did come up with very cute names: Sniff Kit, Pop Chalk, Fuzzable, Mooney Hen, Death Mop, Princess Pow, Sun Fairy, Wind Sprite, Evil. Very, very hilarious, cute names when you feed it all the attributes of guinea pig. On the other hand, Dark, Lenderdord, Slorky, Suggle, Norfter King, Bunny Tuttles, Erig, Mas Pagdo. So see, you got a 50-50 shot here. And our favorite was the last one, Bo 80 Odd Diesel. We don't know why the computer thought it was a good idea to put the number 8 in the middle of a name, but it did. And just to show you, I'm not making this up, let me introduce Princess Pow and her mom in a little bit over there. Next to her is Smudge Fairy. This is Sun Fairy, Wind Sprite, and Evil Bee. And then my own little pig is Death Mop. Yeah. Okay, so now chaos, which is what military does, law enforcement does, and what we do. So chaos, quantitative data, obviously we start somewhere. The models are very different, and you'll be seeing what some of those models look like. Our sources, of course, are unlimited. So yes, we look at survey and sales data, which you'll see, but we also have the ability with this forecasting to look at overlay government movement, technology, being born, competitor movement, adversary ally, health, clinical health research, behavioral, food and beverage research, and shockingly, we use AI. We do not use it to look for anything new. We use it to track things that are on the ground running. We have limits also. So one of the limits is I have to work with other natural pattern recognizers on my team, or they will kill me, or I will kill them. 4% of the population, so they all get tested before they can interview. The other thing is it's wildly time consuming to what we do because we deal with thousands of pieces of data. I myself wake up every morning and I have to read a minimum of 1,200 research reports or industry events a morning. That's what I have to start with and then sort them. So for our types of brains, that's very calming to look at that amount of data. Other people, again, last about a week with us. So the forecasting is called variable because it does consider it future influences. So it's good for tracking and forecasting. And its nickname is streaming intelligence because as a think tank, we're watching these patterns in real time at all times for our clients. So the diagramming is very different. Timeline diagrams, link diagrams, time link diagrams, and you'll see what some of these look like. But the difference is these diagrams, if you look at like a bar chart, that handles one question at a time, like how many consumers are snacking for breakfast, and it answers that question. These diagrams that we use handle dozens or hundreds of research inputs at a time. So they build entire stories. So this is one of my favorite slides. So this is where we're going to be going today. So chaos pool, this is a swimming pool. On the left side, yes, you have the starting line, you get in the swimming pool, you swim across to the right side, which is the finish line. The first thing into the pool are called influences, not influencers, not bloggers, not human beings. These are called influences. Influences, think of them as parents of trends, which is what chaos is geared to watch. Parents of trends are things you have no control over. So Russia-Ukraine conflict is a parent, COVID-19, inflation, recession, school shootings, fires in California, hurricanes on the go. These are all parents that can all birth a trend. You cannot control them. So they're in first. Next you have on the bottom, you have in normal everyday consumer media. They like little puzzle pieces, snippets, so they're in next. Influencers on the top are just a hair later. Influencers, so now these are your bloggers, social media, etc. 90% of the time, you know, they are not experts in what they're talking about. They have a big mouth and a big following, and that's what they're doing. They're yapping about something. They also never ever birth a trend. They take credit for it, but they don't. What they're doing is they're seeing consumer media. They're seeing something already born, and they're yapping about it. So what they really are to a trend is they're either cheerleaders or bullies to a trend because they can sway, but they don't ever cause its birth. A little bit later is our industry. So magazines, conferences, etc. Because we don't like puzzle pieces, we like full-blown stories. A little bit later, did the influencers do anything around a trend? Yes or no? And now you have new products, right? So industry's like, that's a fantastic trend. I'm going to make new products. So they launch them. A little bit later, you have consumer surveys. So consumers can only tell you what they did yesterday. They cannot tell you what they're going to do in 18 months from now, which is what you need to know. So you cannot survey a consumer until a trend is on the ground running and full blown. Otherwise, a consumer won't know what the heck you're talking about if you're asking them about plant protein. A little bit later than this, you've got the new product sales data. So new products are out there, you have to wait. Now what are the sales looking like? In the middle of all this, you may have adversaries and allies. That is different than influencers. Adversaries and allies typically are well educated in what they're talking about. They're well funded, well organized, often have the ear of government, may have a hand on technology. That's why we have to watch them. So what we say is if you forecast trends by standing in the shallow end of the pool, which is normal, you're looking at new product sales data, what consumers are saying, you absolutely have no idea where this thing came from. You don't know where it's going, and you probably don't know how long it's going to last, but you do know it exists. So you're just following it at this point. Okay, so I'm going to talk in these times right now and going forward a little bit about whether you deal with straight to consumer or B2B. It doesn't matter, business to business clients, behavior and drivers are the same. So we've got first, now we're dealing with Russia, right? But at first we had recession, then we had inflation, then COVID-19 kicking in. Recession and inflation do the same thing to consumers, and this is worldwide. It causes psychological fear. Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to be able to feed the kids, et cetera, et cetera? So psychological fear kicks in. COVID-19 is a little bit different. COVID-19 caused psychological fear and physical fear. I could get sick, someone else could get sick, etc. So that's a new element. So the initial reaction we all went through with psychological is the panic buying, the hoarding, I don't care what it costs, I need that product, right? And physical fear, they started avoiding, salad bars and different things, or space and brand. They didn't want to go to the crowded grocery store, for example, or the crowded restaurant. Secondary reaction is we're still in. Secondary is, in some cases, budget is kind of trumping convenience. So it's like, because of inflation now, we're kind of mindful of like, how are we spending and what are we spending it on? And so I may be trading down. I may buy my favorite product, but then, I might be skimping on some other product, or I may not go out to dinner at a restaurant. I might be eating at home tonight. Physical fear is product abandonment. If your product has gone through a recall, has anything associated with the packaging closure, is unsafe because of COVID, anything, they can abandon the product. They can also space and brand abandon the whole brand as an effect of that. It's usually temporary, sometimes not. So what we want to do is you always want to address, if the fear is unfounded, if the product's having a problem, address the fear. Don't just pull the product, because if you address the fear and correct it, educate, then the product stays on the market, right? If you just pull the product, now you're justifying the unwarranted fear that consumers had, and they're like, aha, I knew something was wrong. So behavior during a crisis like we're in is critical to know. So there's action, this is an action reaction map. So actions, and then what are the reactions? With actions, there's 3 reactions they can take. They can either surrender and go, there's nothing I can do about COVID and inflation and Russia and everything, so I'm not going to change any of my behavior. You could also have a temporary disengagement, and this is what happens, for example, with sustainability. I'm not going to pay extra for sustainable products. It costs too much. I don't care if it's saving the world. I got to feed my family. So they temporarily disengage. They usually re-engage over time. Or you could have pure abandonment. This is a permanent away from a product or a brand. Abandonment has been shown to occur most likely in the lowest income levels, because even without crisis, the lowest income levels are struggling day to day anyway. So they really don't have time to figure out if they get to trust you again at some later point. They just walk away and go to some other brand. And I will bring up right now with e-commerce, e-commerce is going to be dropping if you haven't noticed it already, because we're all back to being out in the world. But e-commerce is a very high percentage of abandonment of the product or the brand because they had trouble with the website. Reaction. What happens during crisis is the level of distrust goes up and the level of safety goes down. So what they're looking for, it's so boring to say transparency, but that's why they're looking for it. It's a fear behavior. They're also looking for knowledge. Those are the 2 things they need around a product or a brand. What it does is it makes them feel grounded. It makes them feel safe. So the desires they're having is personally, What they're looking for from our brand or a product is reassurance, knowledge, and they also are very attracted to brand recognition because that makes them feel calm. This brand's been around for 50 years, et cetera. That's why. Corporately, they're looking for corporations to buy from that are stable, accountable, again, transparent, organic, ethically responsible, they feel like, and they will abandon you if they don't think you are, by the way. And they're very much attracted to a company with history, legacy, and roots. They want to know, where is this coming from? How long have you been around? So the consumers field division right now is starting to kind of widen. What's happening is not that their confidence is going up only because they're getting used to a higher set point of fear in their lives. They've kind of adjusted to this higher stuff that's going on around them. So as that confidence kind of returns, so they can start refocusing, for instance, on sustainability issues. So they've always been dedicated and the drivers have already been there for sustainability, but they weren't purchasing. Now those numbers are starting to go back up. This is a little baby link diagram, and this is research attached. And again, you'll be getting these slides, so we don't have to go through every single one of them. But just the research is showing that now they're kind of putting their money where their mouth is. And by the way, if you want to look at the generations, Gen Z is the younger generation. There's Alpha Gen, but those are babies. Gen Z, that younger generation, they're in a gen that actually walks their talk. In behavioral research and survey research, if they say they're going to buy sustainable, they're going to buy sustainable. Millennials do not. No offense to millennials. Nobody write me letters. Millennials don't. Millennials all day long will tell you what they think in a survey and then absolutely not do it in real life. So behavioral research shows this. Part of the reason we know Gen Z has this I will do what I say behavior is because they're the babies of Gen X. And Gen X is the most disillusioned gen we have, and they do what they say as well. And that's why the babies act the same. So stockpiling kind of calmed a little bit, but the second Russia-Ukraine conflict kicked in, it started again. So the parent first was COVID-19. That's what started this stockpiling behavior. And then it calmed a little bit. And now it came back again because of so Russia-Ukraine conflict overtook it as a parent. It's called a bachelorette birth pattern because it's a one parent birth. So it's a little single parent that causes this behavior. And this is just some of the research just to show you how many and who are picking up that this stockpiling behavior is continuing to go forward. So if your product can it be frozen? Can you offer recipes for your product to go into that then can be frozen, or it's shelf stable? Could you buy 5 of these in a pack and now I'm saving a little bit of money and putting it on my shelf? That's what they're looking for. And that's why packaging options are starting to shift too, because it's supporting the stockpiling behavior. So sustainability in particular, and that shouldn't be sustainability, that should just be consumers. Sorry about that, I'll get that changed. This is really more about consumers overall. What they're doing right now is comfort food is out. If you haven't gotten the message, comfort food is done. What consumers are doing, even though they're still in this fearful, stressful position, they're now seeking authentic, yes, they don't want fusion, they don't want crazy things. They want authentic but new food and beverage flavor experiences, whether it's in the cocktail scene, whether your products go into baked goods. They do not want comfort food. What they want is something a little bit new, something global, something regional from the US that they haven't tried before. But that's the direction they're absolutely have been heading for the last 6 months. This is called a navigation table. So again, you'll be able to see this later. What we do is we not only tell you the trend, which is that aha moment, but then we tell you navigation, what to do about it. And then we do breaking waves in blue ocean. Here's what this will look 6 months out. And then 2 years out, this is how this is going to look. So now if we suddenly do crash into a recession again, and Russia's still doing what Russia's doing, and the finances are out of control, we may slide back to comfort food. Right now, there is no research in consumer research indicating consumers are anywhere near going back to comfort food. But that's how you read this. And then the bottom is just literally, we talk about each parent and which parent has the most responsibility because they will resolve at different levels. But that's what a navigation table looks like. So I'm going to take you through an actual birth. Ready? You can stand behind the mom. It's okay. It's not too messy. So we have to go way, way back in time to show you a birth of a trend that is still on the playground right now. But this is how we do it. And you'll see it's all different analytics that we use. We're going to look at in North America, the Deep South trend, because it's rearing its head again. It's still very strong. Its birth pattern, it's called a courier because interestingly, the birth of Southern food way back in 2008 did not occur in the food industry. Its parent is actually the book publishing industry. That's who caused the birth to occur. This is going to be called a time link diagram. They're super fun to watch. So birth is over by book publishers. So what happened in 2007 is 8 cookbooks from the Deep South simultaneously got published in about a 4-month period. TV and news media picked up on this, Wall Street Journal, everybody else picked up and started reviewing these cookbooks. This was late 2007. Travel industry picked up on this, as did grocery, and started promoting foods that would be grown in the Deep South. Travel industry also went heavy that year into Southern region, Deep South region of the US. Consumers are now seeing this interesting pattern of what's soul food, what's Southern food from grocery, from travel mags, from TV and news media. Family and quick serve was the first in on this trend nationally. So some people think, oh, flavor trends start in high-end restaurants. We rarely see that happen. It's kind of a ridiculous assumption because not everyone can afford to go to high-end restaurants. This actually, I can prove, started in family and quick service. And this is what it looks like. This is an up close, this is a timeline. What happened in January 2008, that's when McDonald's launched their Southern chicken sandwich nationally. About 5 months later, Shane Ribs expanded north and west. Museum of Southern Cuisine opened up in New Orleans. A couple months later, Popeyes reinvents itself as Louisiana Kitchen. Dickey's Barbecue then does the same, expands north and west. Virginia's Barbecue then expands west. Popeyes then comes out with this new specific Louisiana bowls and big easy bowls and sandwiches. Wine pairing article comes out specifically pairing wine with Southern food. This was critical because the news service picked it up and it ended up in the New York Times, LA Times, Miami Herald. Crystal then introduces its spicy Southern chicken sandwich. A soul food article then comes out on Tallahassee, and then that gets picked up by the national press. TGI Fridays nationally then launches its Southern shrimp dish. And at this point, Bon Appetit names New Southern as the cuisine of '09. It named it again in 2012. Soul food then, research came out in the climbing of soul food, but in California. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the time link. So leaves family and quick service, gets down to TV and news media. So this is when the Paula Deen shows and all those cooking shows started showing up on the food channels and the food networks. Bar and cocktails were in on this next. So this is when all the fabulous deep Southern cocktails started coming out and hitting bars all over the US. Eventually it made it into high-end restaurants, and that's when fried chicken was on high-end restaurants, and so was shrimp and grits. But that's not where it started. Food manufacturers were in on it last. They went into grocery store, and this was with either dried goods or it was with frozen foods, for example. TV and news media picked up on this again. And it went back up to travel and back over to the wine industry now for the first time. So now the wine industry, any wines from the Deep South are coming out for Texas, et cetera. Governments then got in on this hilariously because now they're super worried about obesity, right? We're all eating Southern food all over the country. It's like, fried chicken's not good for everybody. So now it went back down to consumers and back over to consumer magazines again. Eventually, Bon Appetit had named this again. Family and quick service restaurants came in onto it again, but this time, this is when there was a launch of family and quick service restaurants that were just dedicated to soul food or Southern food, and they were making national press. Okay, so now let's take Deep South into a morph. A morph is a birth pattern when, we call it when a cousin steals the spotlight, and this is what it looks like. So 2008, it literally was, unfortunately, called soul food. 2010, along this path, it turned into, Cajun Creole kind of became the focus nationally. 2013, that's when Low Country and Shrimp and Grits was sweeping the nation. And Low Country, if you don't know, is the Georgian coast in South Carolina. Appalachian came in next. Ozark came in next. This is also about the time when, is it Netflix that has Ozark, literally the TV show Ozark? That was not a coincidence. That was on purpose. Gullah cuisine came in 2020. And right now, actually, we're back rolling around to low country cuisine again. So when you can snippet trends too. So within Southern Trend, you can look just at regional barbecue, which is what we did. So again, during this time period, so regional barbecue, those your sauces, your spices, what foods are you putting on the barbecue? How are you interacting with this trend? There's 1,000 ways to do this. Birth. Everybody in the US in 2008 knew Texas barbecue. We at least knew that much. But what happened as it went then to Jamaican jerk and to the Caribbean. Then it switched over to kebabs from the Middle East. Nashville, Tennessee took up arms then with their regional barbecue. Mexico barbacoa showed up next on the hit list. Brazilian churrasco showed up as a trend. Asado from Argentina then took over. Korean was more recent. It went over to Indonesia with satay. Indian was next, didn't last too long, but then South Africa came on as our newest little player on the list. So you can snippet trends like that too to see where inside of a trend to play. And this was a fusion pattern. And a fusion pattern is the most complicated birth pattern we have because it means you have multiple parents. In this case, it was the Deep South trend, the travel trends at the time, and unfortunately political unrest also caused this trend to come into play. So fusion patterns tend to last longer, have a longer life cycle because you'd have to kill off all the parents to kill off the kid, which is the trend. That's why they last longer. And just again, a handful of research of all of these search terms actually showing up. Okay. And you'll be able to have this. So when you're looking at, well, where would I be inspired about, like, how would I possibly know what's coming next? You have to look at recovery forecasts first because you have to get ahead of where consumers are going to be. So even though it looks like we may be headed into recession, it's not happened yet. Consumers are actually not behaving like they're in a recession. During COVID, they were. Right now, they're not. So what we're seeing in survey work is they want efficiency, they want ease, and that's because they're getting back to their jobs. And the cause is they don't have time on their hands. So what we're seeing is return to restaurants, convenience kind of trumping budget, brands versus private label is rebounding, and travel abroad to an extent is coming back. Certainly travel around within the States is coming back. Spending, when they start saying, you know, if I value it, I'm going to pay more for it. If it's worth it to me, I'm going to pay more. That's because their incomes are going up. So we start seeing coupon use going down, value trumping budget, green spending or sustainability spending going up, and then trade-off versus trumps trade down. So I might go to my favorite restaurant tonight and maybe I'll brown bag lunch tomorrow. And then food and flavor, what we're seeing right now is they want to explore more. They want to get more educated on where something's coming from. Why? Because it's not exactly that their fear has dropped right now. It's that they've adjusted to a higher level of fear in their lives. So desserts come back into the spotlight. Exotic and experimental trump comfort, luxury and indulgence rebound, playfulness and risk returns in the food and beverage world, which is exactly what we're seeing right now. So flavor drivers, flavor is still a stronger driver than health, unfortunately or unfortunately. And again, a handful, Data Essentials picking this up, Innova, Calcic, everybody's picking this up. This is just a handful, but again, they're wanting to try new flavors and snacks. Millennials are looking for more intense, intriguing flavors. All of this research keeps showing up, and this is just a handful of them. But that's why we know don't do comfort food. The flavors actually morph themselves. So when you're in a recession, you're typically in comfort food. But right now, kind of, we're in the stall pattern is what we actually are, where we're in inflation, we might go back into recession. This is what's happening. So we're stuck in a sort of fun, playful area. It's hybrids and stuffed foods. So you start seeing mashups, hybrids of foods coming in. So, I want to say it might have been Panera who came out with a macaroni and cheese grilled cheese sandwich. So they took macaroni and cheese and put it in. That's a hybrid. So you take two familiar things and you put them together. It's very fun and flirty. The poster child in 2008 was the cronut, croissant and donut. That's a hybrid. So we're kind of stuck in this area. There's global foods coming in, et cetera, but we're not doing fusion foods. We're not doing molecular. We're not losing our mind yet. We're not that confident yet. So the other thing, again, you'll get this copy, but I'll put this up here. We also use longevity charts. And so we did some just for fun on peanuts and tree nuts. And so the upper right-hand corner, it says rock stars. These are either nut products or nuts. Dotted line separates them. These are the ones that are rock stars. You can put them into everything. They go with a whole bunch of trends. They're kind of unstoppable. As you start moving into the other quadrants, they either have a shorter life cycle or they may have some obstacles in their way. We also take the same ones and we put them on what's called approachability scales. So longevity scales, how long is this thing going to last? Are there obstacles? But then this is what they look like when you put them on approachability scales. So high approachable to the right means very approachable. You can put them in a lot of products. Consumers instantly recognize what these are. When you go to the lower end, it's either they're a little more unfamiliar, or they might be expensive, or they're a little harder to get a hold of, or they might be items that don't play well in all products. It does not mean they're bad. It just means they're a little more specific for whatever reason. And so you kind of pair in your product, well, where do we want to be? Do we want to be a short-lived but one-hit wonder product and aim at crazy Gen Z? Might be lower, you know, who's your audience? So we use those two types of tables combined to figure out, like, how do we want to make a product? Like, where do you want this product to be? There are also trend behaviors that are, like I said, they're always in motion. So these are 3 trends right now that are accelerating. The first one, like I said, is the food and beverage experimentation. This primarily is due to the recession originally resolving, and now the fears around COVID are calming. COVID's here, but we're not as fearful of it. So navigation, again, because we always tell you, now what do you do about it? Whatever the product is, you could keep that base of the product kind of familiar, approachable, but then you're using the seasonings, add-ins, or how you're preparing it. That can be the party dress, right? If it's the opposite, if your product's a little crazy, you want the seasonings, add-ins, and preps to be a little calmer, a little not so crazy. But global cuisine and beverage, global comfort is kind of a safer place to be. Sustainability is now accelerating again. So recession is resolving. Now we have inflation. Russia really has nothing to do with sustainability patterns for us. Inflation is slowing this down, but we're back to consumers feeling empowered by buying sustainable products. But if you can promote no cost sustainable features. So let's say your packaging or how your product's harvested, let's say, maybe it's sustainable. It's not costing the consumer anything else. Just say it out loud, because sometimes they just don't know you're doing it. And it costs you nothing, costs them nothing, and empowers them. And then alcohol, if your products interact with alcohol, interestingly, inflation is now causing us to drink more, and so is the Russia-Ukraine conflict is also causing us to drink more. We kind of slid back to, we're back to not drinking, and then Russia did its nonsense, and we're like, okay, everybody's back to drinking. So you want to tie the alcohol product to, if there's a benefit, meaning emotional, right? Is the drink beverage tied to history? Is it an escape? Is it tied to a region? And by the way, alcohol right now is going more complex. So we're not drinking gin and tonics. We're drinking like tiki drinks. Like we're back to trying to be on vacation somehow mentally, even in our minds. So if you're pairing your products with alcohol, know that it's more complicated cocktails, higher end wines, beers, etc., not super approachable. The ones that are evolving, so the health drivers for now a couple of years has been immune function, cognitive function. Immune was because of COVID-19. Inflation, now Russia, and COVID-19 have caused depression, stress, anxiety, etc. But where it's moving is obesity. Again, we're a little bit calmer, used to the stress. So now our lens is opening, and we realize we've gained 10 pounds because of COVID. So obesity is now a concern again. Lens is opened up a little bit. And you can explore some of the global items that are coming in that may help with any of these. Like, does that product have history in helping with calming the body or the mind? These sorts of things is what you can look for. Snacking. Snacking gained ground because of COVID-19, because of stress. Then it calmed down a little bit, and now it's kind of coming back because of Russia-Ukraine conflict. So snacking decreased, but the big difference with snacking is now it's not, at the height of recession and COVID, it was the salty, sweet, indulgent, ice cream, etc. Like, bah. Now it's more health bent. So now health is the leading lady in any snack product, and indulgence is kind of the best friend in the movie. So she's the backup dancer now. Affordability is still kind of number one, but health now and snacking is number two. And then indulgence still needs to be there, but it's kind of a distant third for consumers because obesity is a concern. And then underdogs, wallflowers, and best friends. Think of these as very common varietals of things. So like in the nut world, it might be peanuts. In the fruit world, it would be apples and pears. But this is reversing. So now more exotic examples of all those items are coming forward. So as the recession resolves, we're now focusing on either fun varietals or, dragon fruit, mango, like some more fun, flirty options within those categories. I'm going to bring all these little guys up. So these are little white space parents to consider when you're thinking about trying to come up with a new product or showcase your product in something to your customer, if it's B2B or it's to consumer. So travel is actually a very powerful parent. But we're kind of in the middle of all this, right? So what consumers are doing is you look to which are the first locations consumers are even allowed to travel to, right? So for Americans, we're going regional US heavily because it's a little bit cheaper. We're also going to the Caribbean right now, only a few parts in Europe because of what Russia is doing. But you look to where could they travel? That's where the flavor trends will come back. So cuisine from travel locations will filter back into this country as a flavor trend. So tie the product to a part of the world. That's why that works. Food service. So you don't look for high-end restaurants. What you do is you look at who are the first chefs or restaurants from anywhere, like diners to high-end, who have done something that were kind of gaining national press, all food service channels. Because what that'll do is it'll gain media and consumer focus and attention, and then that's how it influences a flavor trend. Most recent regional global flavors. Here's another trick. Before COVID-19 and the recession hit is a place for trends to kind of restart. So they'll regain ground as we reset, as other new flavors get their footing. That's why regional Korean is showing back up, regional Mexican is showing up, Peruvian is showing up again, Low Country is showing up again, Hawaiian cuisine. Those were the 2019 trends. They're just restarting while we're getting our footing on everything else. You can also look at what were the predicted 2020 trends that then stopped. So as when we went into shutdown, all trends went into shutdown too. So that's where Levantine, which is the Middle Eastern cuisine, South American, other South American cuisines, Native American, Ozarks, North African cuisine, Caribbean, that's why they're all coming back because they got shut out and now they're actually starting. Crisis is also an excellent parent. Tends to be shorter lived, but it's an excellent parent. So COVID-19 and recession specifically, what they caused is generational recipes to come forward, which was part of comfort food. So what did my grandmother used to cook? Street food came back. Camping food came back because that's why there was a s'mores explosion for a while, because we couldn't afford to go anywhere. We wanted to be alone. We hated the world. So we went camping. That's what we did. Black Lives Matter had a huge influence, still is. So regional Africans started coming forward. That's where Gullah cuisine came forward. That's where Low Country came forward again. Political unrest, Russia, Ukraine, China, all the border states with our political nonsense going on, all came forward. Texas barbecue came back again. Regional Mexico came back again as well. Also celebration. So the best way to make your country a flavor trend in every other country is hold some national sporting event. So in this case, the Olympics. Japan, China, both had the Olympics. That's why the cuisine started coming in again. So look for who's going to hold the national soccer championships. That I guarantee that cuisine for at least a year will be kind of a trend for North America. So the recovery patterns look for consumers are regaining confidence as inflation, Russia-Ukraine conflict hopefully resolves, COVID-19 starts resolving. This could reverse, but this is the direction we're headed. Consumers are also, again, seeking authentic but new flavor and beverage trends or flavor experiences. Health and indulgence have that alliance within a product. So they don't want just to eat a salad. They want something delicious in that salad. And then again, food and cuisine regaining that experimental edge. So final thoughts. Know the birth and life cycle of a trend prior to deciding to enter it so you know how to navigate it. Neither love nor hate a trend because emotions will fog the trend's true pattern and you may be blindsided when it shifts, and it will always shift. And also remember, spend more time researching a trend's personality and trajectory than worrying about what your competitors are doing. After all, they may be idiots. Thank you. I didn't do that.
Susie, anybody have any questions? All right,
Yeah.
seeing none, why don't we take a 10-minute break and then we'll close things out with our last speaker. Someone's going to talk for about 5 minutes before you, and then I know yours is over. I put it on here earlier, but I have it on here too. I don't see it.
There it is.
Okay. All right.
Oh, so after he finishes, are you going to introduce me, or do you want me to just come up and, okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever's quickest and easiest. That all looks very familiar. That looks like things I would talk about.
Get back. Okay.
Perfect. Great.
All right. Sounds good.
Great.
All right. Let me get that other presentation up. Okay, just gonna load yours. Oh, there's that.
It's supposed to stop raining, it'll stop from 1 to 7, and then 7, because of the rain. In our culture, it's 6. Okay. Yeah, I know, it's going. I want to make an announcement about the food that I have made once again.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think we're going to continue to move on. Okay, a couple things. The boat cruise tonight, as of now, is still on, so the weather is cooperating, it looks like. Where are you meeting for that? Aaron is going to have the details shortly, and somebody at the hotel staff is putting directions together for you. If it's nice enough, it's about a mile walk down, just past the Bahia Mir. I forget the name of the hotel. We walked it the other day. It was a nice. But the hotel is going to provide directions. We should have those shortly. If it ends up needing to be canceled, we'll get word to anybody who's registered. So a couple words of thanks that we weren't able to do because it all happened last night. So I want to thank Confident Insurance Services for sponsoring the reception, the dinner sponsor, Geller Global Group, the wine sponsor last night, AMD Oil Sales. I'm reading it. I don't know how that got in there, Don. I'm sorry. So it's AMD Oil Sales. And then the certified group that sponsored the entertainment. And then again, for the break this morning. Thank you, Schreiber Foods. So with that, we'll end our world tour with a group from Poland coming up. I've had the pleasure in the past 2 months of being a guest at 2 events hosted by Polish group focusing on organic Polish foods. Who would like as many members as possible to attend something they're going to do at the Fancy Food Show. So as soon as we get the details on that, we'll pass it along. But it is my pleasure to bring Chris Grabowski up front from the Polish group.
Thank you, Bob. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Grabowski. I represent Polish Investment and Trade Agency, New York office. Sure. I was gonna say that I'm from New York. I represent Polish Investment and Trade Agency office in New York. We are a trade office of Poland. We exist in over 40 different markets globally. We have around 50 offices on all the continents, and so we promote small and medium-sized Polish companies in their international expansion into different markets, as well as we attract investors. Like my responsibility is to bring as many American investors to Poland, and therefore, so if you guys are planning or thinking about opening operations in Central Eastern Europe, feel free to reach out, and I'll be more than happy to help you in the process. Our headquarters in Warsaw is about 200 people. So whenever you might have any needs as far as the food sector goes, current needs or future needs, I'll be more than happy to assist and direct you into appropriate producers. I want to thank you very much, Bob, for having me here, and Aaron. Aaron is not here at the moment, but for inviting us to the convention. It's a pleasure to be here and be able to speak in front of you, and be able to make so many valuable connections over the last 3 days. Hoping to meet the rest of you as we go along. Like I said, my telephone number and my email address is over there, so feel free to reach out. I also want to send special thanks to the Polish Export Cluster and its president Sebastian for making it possible for Polish companies to come with us to the convention. And so Sebastian has been working with me in the past, bringing Polish companies into the U.S. markets and into different markets too. So so we are happy that we can continue this relationship going forward. And that some of the companies that are here with us today are Elena, Eva Bis, Unitop, and Daltona. So just to give you for instance, the stuff that is on the table is actually produced by, it's dried fruit chips that are produced by one of our producers here, Elena, and I strongly encourage you to try some of it and let us know what you think about it. But stuff is really good. I strongly recommend it. Couple of words about Poland and the Polish food sector. Poland, as you probably know, has a long tradition of producing high quality food products. And just to give you for instance, our sector is very resilient. And so despite the pandemic that happened, that is still not over, we managed to increase our exports from year to year over 9% from 2020 to 2021. So we are actually strong in export expansion. Our total exports of food products are roughly 37 billion euros annually. This year, by the end of 2022, we are expecting to be able to export around 40 billion euros, which is roughly, I don't know, $45 billion in total food exports from Poland to the rest of the world. United States market is still a growing market for us. We are trying to introduce as many companies as possible. Over the last year, we increased exports into the United States by 14%. So it's quite an achievement for us, and we are happy with it. But as you would imagine, we would like to grab some more of it, and therefore, I would like to, like Bob mentioned before, also invite you to a summer fancy food show in New York that will take place in June. We're gonna be there as a Polish investment and trade agency with our pavilion, but also Polish Ministry of Agriculture and Polish export cluster will also gonna be there. So I strongly encourage you to visit our stand when you are there. You know, the stuff that we are really strong in exporting and producing is basically meats. Meat is the #1 export product of Poland. As I was helping one of the trade missions from Poland, Union of Meat Producers, I actually did some research and I found out that by the data of the USDA website, Poland is #1 exporter of pork into the United States out of all the European Union countries. So we are actually strong in that regard. And so one of the companies, Eva Bees, is actually specializing in exporting meats into the different markets, including United States. But we are also very strong in exporting fruits and vegetables. Most of the companies that are here with us are actually the leaders in export and production of fruits, and dried food is one of the examples that hopefully you will have a chance to try now. So yeah, and like I said, Polish market for foods is actually the sixth largest market in Europe. 44% of our production of food production in Poland ends up being exported, and so the trend is actually such that, you know, that we are seeing American tastes changing, and people are more aware and conscious, health conscious, and therefore they are looking for foods that are rich in that are basically healthy, and therefore this trend that we are trying to take advantage of as Poland. So that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you very much, and again. Like I said, I invite you to the Summer Fancy Food in New York. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so just one other housekeeping detail right at the conclusion of this presentation. We'll wrap things up for the full convention, but there'll be the Nut and Ag section meeting. That'll take place right in here. So it's my pleasure to welcome back an old friend to AFI, someone whose talks AFI members have always looked forward to. Scott Clemens began his career at Brown Brothers Harriman in 1990 as partner and chief investment strategist for the firm's private banking business. Scott's one of the firm's primary writers and speakers on topics related to the economy, financial markets, and investing. He served as an analyst, portfolio manager of European and Asian equities, and in 2001 moved into domestic equity management and research, and eventually to the manager role for the New York office of the firm's private wealth management business. He joins us today to address the constant change we must weather as individuals and business professionals in the economy and the markets. And it's always a pleasure to welcome Scott. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Good morning. I woke up this morning to the sound of thunder, and I thought to myself, what a delightful morning to spend inside a windowless conference room talking about the economy. So thank you for sticking it through to the end. I do hope that the rain clears in time for you to enjoy a sunset cruise later on today. Let me say a word or two about Brown Brothers Harriman and Company. We are the only private bank in the United States of America. That didn't used to be the case, but we were founded in 1818 as a private partnership, and 204 years later, we remain a private partnership. So there are 32 men and women who own the firm outright. There is no outside capital. There is no debt on the balance sheet, and the 32 of us carry joint and several unlimited liability for the obligations of the bank. It is an ownership structure that tends to focus the mind, as you might imagine. Our very first business was financing commodities, and we are still in the business today. You go back and look at our original account book dated March of 1818. The very first loan we made was to finance the importation of raw coffee. And we continue to finance the importation of raw coffee, along with a whole host of other commodities as well. So basically, we're in two businesses which are very closely related. We are a bank. We loan money to, among other industries, the commodities and logistics industry. And we also are an investment advisor. So to the degree that our clients have liquidity events, they sell the business, they sell part of the business, they just make money on the business, we are financial advisors as well. I've been at the firm for 32 years, which seems impossible, but I've checked the math and it's true. So when I think about the economy and I think about financial markets, I do not have the luxury of adhering to a particular school of thought. Because no matter how elegant your theory is, and you all know this from practice, when that theory collides with reality, it's reality that survives. So I feel like for the past 32 years, I have been a perpetual student in the graduate school of practical economics. What I want to share with you over the next 25 or 30 minutes or so is what I see going on. Mostly, I'll focus mostly domestically today, and I'll try to leave some time at the end for questions. I should say, as I always do, that's my contact information. If you want to reach out to me afterwards, if you'd like to have a copy of this presentation, I know Bob has it and Aaron has it. I'm happy to send it to you directly as well. So the outline of what I want to talk about is pretty straightforward. I think there are four major transitions happening in the U.S. economy today. They are not new. These are not things that just started recently. They've been underway for a while. They're all related, but they'll form, if you will, sort of the warp and weave of what takes place in the economy. First of which is a transition in economic leadership away from the policy, monetary policy, fiscal policy drivers of the past couple of years back to something more organic and traditional. There's a price to be paid for all of this monetary and fiscal policy in the form of inflation. I do not need to tell this audience that. The third transition, which is really important, is the monetary policy transition, which is happening almost literally as we're gathered here, as the Federal Reserve seeks to restore a more normal level of interest rates and monetary activity. A fourth transition that I think doesn't get enough attention, but is a really big silver lining in this otherwise dark cloud of the past few years, is a surge in economic productivity that I think is sustainable. And as a tailwind to economic activity, that's something that's worth focusing on, all of which, of course, has implications for both the economy and financial markets. Given the time, I have dialed back the financial markets conversation part of this presentation. I'll touch on it at the end in the interest of speaking mostly about the economic side of it. I first want to look at that first transition, the transition in economic leadership. At the end of the day, the single most important driver of economic activity is you. It's personal spending. Household consumption is 68% of GDP. And that is not to dismiss the importance of other parts of the economy, trade, government, business spending, investment, real estate, all of those things. But all of those things only add up to 32% of GDP. As goes the consumer, so goes the economy. In turn, this is why the labor market is so important. What you're looking at here is month over month net job gains, and it's a pretty impressive record. To be fair, we ought to really recall this recovery in jobs as opposed to job gains, because most of this represents a recovery from the first couple of months of the pandemic, during which the economy lost tens of millions of jobs. What's encouraging to me is that we've been adding jobs at about 500,000 pace per month. Even more encouraging, that didn't slow down in January and February of this year when the surge in the Omicron virus raised concerns that perhaps the economy might take a step backwards. The labor market did not. That's actually a very good sign. Now, before anyone can interrupt me, I will readily admit that this is a glass half full picture of the labor market. And as is always the case in economics, there's no one picture that captures every trend. Something else is going on in the labor market, and again, I don't need to tell you this, which is a real imbalance in the supply of and the demand for labor. The blue line on this page is job openings. The fact that it has risen so sharply over the past 18 months is good news. That's a sign of an economy not only in recovery, but in pretty robust growth mode. There wouldn't be that many job openings if there weren't real need for people to run businesses and stock warehouses and drive trucks and all the things that make the economy work. The bad news, which this chart readily shows, is there aren't enough people to do it. The red line is the available supply of labor. And as you can see right now, the gap between the two is 5 million souls. I work with a lot of business owners across a lot of different geographies and a lot of different industries, and never in my career have I seen the unanimity of concern about one trend, and that one trend being the inability to find labor. This is often referred to as the Great Resignation. The shorthand for this is everyone's quit, no one wants to go back to work again. The real story is a little bit more nuanced than that. We can look at measures of labor force participation. So it's literally what percentage of the people within a certain age range are part of the labor force. And to be specific in my terminology, to be part of the labor force, you either have to have a job or be looking for a job. Why might you not be in the labor force? You might be a full-time student, you might be disabled, you might just not be looking for a job. If you're sitting at home on the couch watching reruns of the Ellen DeGeneres show, you're not part of the labor force. You could be, but if you're not volitionally looking for a job, you're not part of the labor force. When you break down the labor force by age group, a different trend presents itself, and I find this very interesting. The red line here is labor force participation in 35 to 54-year-olds. So I think of that as, if you will, the core of the labor force. These are not first-time career entrants. These are not people who are quite yet at retirement age. That's the bulk of the labor force. That participation rate right now is at 83.2%. And then the little number in parentheses compares that to February of 2020. So just prior to the onset of the pandemic and the economic crisis that followed. That core of the labor force, that participation rate is almost back up to where it was pre-pandemic. This is data as of March. Give it another month, maybe two. I think the recovery in the labor force for that core will be complete. Different demographics, though, tell a different story. The blue line are early career entrants. These are people, many of whom entered the labor force during the pandemic, which sort of blows my mind to think about how difficult that was to do, although we certainly did it. We hired people during the pandemic. I have colleagues now that I do not know how tall they are because I only ever see them on Zoom. That's very weird to me, but I'm old school in that regard. Here, the labor force participation rate hasn't completely recovered. This is an age group that's figuring out, what do I want to do? Where do I want to do it? Do I want to be on the West Coast, the East Coast? Do I want to go back to school? That's a natural part of these early career entrants. It's on steroids now because of the disruption of COVID. So instead of thinking of that as a great resignation, think of that as a great uncertainty or a great anxiety. What is it all about? At the other end of the demographic spectrum, at the very bottom, the participation rate of people aged 55 and older. This is lower to begin with for obvious reasons. Here too, like with the blue line, the participation rate has fallen and has not recovered. But think about who those 55 and up people are. I'm going to wave my hands because we economists get to do that. Generally speaking, that is an age group that is more susceptible to the implications of COVID. Generally speaking, that's also an age group that's been saving for retirement longer. Their IRAs, their 401ks have more money in them. Recent volatility in the markets notwithstanding, the market has doubled since March of 2020. They have more money. They have more wherewithal to retire. Furthermore, this is an age group that tends to have more equity in their homes. I don't need to tell you what the housing market has done over the past 2 or 2.5 years. So not only is this an age group that is more susceptible to COVID, it's an age group that is more financially secure and able to say, you know what, maybe this was a retirement earlier than I anticipated, but that's okay. So instead of the great resignation, I think of this as more of a great uncertainty among the younger part of the population and a great retirement in the older part of the population. I could go into a long discourse about how companies are responding to this, but suffice it to say, if you're looking to hire and there are ways that you can uniquely appeal to either of those very young or at the end of their career age groups, you probably have a competitive advantage over those companies competing to hire in that red category where there truly is a lack of supply and demand. At the macroeconomic level, though, what is it that's going to enable this to recover? This, to me, is the most important graph of the past 2 or 3 years because I think it helps to explain a lot of things. It's a very simple graph. The blue line here is disposable household income. After tax, money in my pocket available to be spent. The red line is how much I spent. By definition, the gap between the two is household savings. There are very few straight lines in economics, but this is one of those rather straight lines until a couple of years ago. The 3 spikes that you see in household income correlate perfectly with the 3 large fiscal stimulus packages measured in the trillions of dollars, not coincidentally designed to put money into people's pockets precisely because spending is so important. Here's the irony. At the same time that household income was spiking higher, it became very difficult to spend money. I know you can sit on the couch and binge Netflix and order Amazon all day long, but when you're in quarantine, when you're not traveling to conferences, traveling on business, traveling on pleasure, buying a new car, whatever it was, personal spending fell off of a cliff. There have been periods in the past 18 months in which annualized household savings was as high as $8 or $9 trillion. That's a third of GDP. That's extraordinary. When you've got that kind of money in your pocket, the incentive to go back to work is pretty slim. But look where we are now. Household spending in aggregate is back down, I'm going to use the quotes, only $1.6 trillion. And I say only because the pre-pandemic average was $2 trillion. So all of this excess savings has been spent, has been exhausted. There's still some left, but we're back down below historically average levels. That says to me the incentive structure is beginning to shift, and people are more willing to turn off the TV and go look for a job. I think we're beginning to see evidence of that already as more and more people are re-entering the labor force. That's a very recent trend. Just in the past few months, it's a pretty slim nail on which to hang a projection. But I think as the year goes forward, you will begin to find it easier. I'm not going to say it's going to happen overnight. You'll begin to find it easier to find labor. There's another implication, though, of all of this excess savings. And you ask yourself, where did that $8 or $9 trillion of money go? And the answer is everywhere. It went everywhere. There's almost nothing in the entire basket that defines the consumer price index that's not up sharply year over year. It can be easy to attribute a lot of the rise in inflation to energy and to food, but that's not necessarily true. The blue part of the bars in this graph is the so-called core CPI, that CPI minus the impacts of food and energy. And then the red stack on top is the food and energy part. So there's a rise pretty much in everything, bringing the CPI up to an 8.5% year over year rate as of March. Couple of things to notice here. CPI is measured on a year over year basis. So literally what that means is that that basket of household goods, the average consumption pattern of the average American household in March of 2022 was 8.5% more expensive than it was in March of 2021. The economy, life, is very different in 2022 than it was in the early days of 2021. And you can see that in this chart. Look what inflation was in March of 2021. 2.6%. That's not alarming. There weren't a whole lot of headlines about the inflation problem at 2.6%, or even earlier in the year, 1.7, 1.4%. So we're comparing maybe 2 different varieties of apples. Maybe it's not quite apples and oranges, but at least 2 different varieties of apples. But if you look at this pattern, the real surge in inflation last year started in sort of April, May, June. That's when that pattern begins to really escalate. So as we get into April, May, and June of this year, that year-over-year comparison becomes more reasonable. And inflation is an annualized year-over-year type concept. So I'm going to go out on a limb and make a short-term economic forecast. I think the last data point on this page, 8.5% inflation, may very well turn out to be the peak. April may be a little bit higher. We'll find out next week. But I think either March or April will turn out to be the peak in inflation. My proof statement for that is when you look under the hood, the month over month rates of inflation for a lot of important parts of the economy, the automotive sector being one of them, have already turned negative. And that doesn't mean prices are collapsing. It just means versus February, we've gotten a little bit of a peak. That'll begin to show up in the year over year numbers as well. As I take a step back and think about the big picture, what prevents this from becoming the 1970s or 1980s type of endemic inflation is that there are some very long-term, very secular disinflationary trends that have not gone away, and if anything, have actually accelerated over the past couple of years. Technology is disinflationary. I love being with people. It is when Aaron called and said, can you come to a conference in person? I said, you mean I have to wear socks? That's great. How quickly can I be there? But I'm not canceling my Zoom license. At the margin, this accelerated adoption of technology is itself a disinflationary trend. Demographics is disinflationary. Aging populations tend to have less inflation. Japan is the poster child of that. And I'm not saying the United States is Japan, but versus 50 years ago in the 1970s, we are an older population, we are an aging population. That's a disinflationary trend. We are far less reliant on energy than we have been in the past. Part of that's because of the adoption of alternative energy sources. What's even bigger is how the economy has shifted much more towards technology and entertainment and software and services away from manufacturing and industry, or at least those latter things have grown more slowly than technology. What does the price of oil matter to Apple or Tesla or Netflix? I mean, it's not nothing. But 50 years ago, the largest stock in the country was General Motors. Today, it's Apple. That's a big, big difference. If you measure our reliance on barrels of oil, it takes 70% fewer barrels of oil today to generate $1 of GDP than it did even in 1990, so just about 30 years ago. We're in an environment of declining union membership, and we're in an environment of greater deregulation. Before you ask the question, I know those are pendulums that swing back and forth, but when you look at where we are now versus where we were 50 years ago, far lower unionization in this country, far greater deregulation. My final point is, I used to say, and oh, by the way, a globalized economy is more disinflationary. And you'll see I've put a great big asterisk next to that because I am not so confident in that as I was even 6 months ago. Part of that is because of the supply chain disruptions coming out of Russia and Ukraine. I think everybody knows how much we rely on Ukraine for food, for wheat and corn in particular, but there are a lot of other things that have been disrupted by the war in Ukraine. Furthermore, and I imagine this audience knows this very well, I see from our own practice that a lot of companies in a wide range of industries are looking at their supply chains and saying, maybe I don't want to be as reliant in the future as I was in the past on a sole supplier of a critical input to my process that's halfway around the world. Maybe I want to duplicate that supply chain. Maybe I want to bring that supply chain closer to home. Maybe instead of just-in-time inventory management, I need to implement just-in-case inventory management. That's a little less disinflationary than it was in the past. So when I wrap this all up, I'm looking for inflation to certainly peak, that last graph that we saw, and come back down to more normal levels, but more normal does not mean pre-pandemic. I think more normal probably means an inflation rate in this country that begins with a 3 instead of beginning with a 1.5 or a 2, which is what it was pre-pandemic. And the market seems to be pricing that in. There's a way within the fixed income market to look at what the aggregate market expectation is of CPI over whatever time period you want to look at. In the inside baseball is it's the difference in yield between a nominal treasury bond and the equivalent inflation protected security. The only difference in those two securities is who bears the risk of inflation, the government on one hand or you, the bondholder, on the other. Conveniently, therefore, the gap between those two yields is where the return on those securities breaks even. And that captures the aggregate market expectation. So you can see as of a couple of days ago what the market was expecting inflation to be over the next 5 years in case of the red line, 10 years in case of the blue line. I'm going to do the economist thing again with my hands and say that's like 3 or 3.5%. Now, that's not the 1.5 or 2% we were living with before the pandemic, but neither is it 8.5%. By the way, I think we're going to get there rather quickly. I'm going to go out on a limb again. One of you will write this down, hold me accountable for this next year. I think by the time we get to the end of this year, the CPI number, let's say December of this year, begins with a 3. It does not begin with an 8. So again, someone will write that down and say, you were wrong in this, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Jay Powell is going to help that be true because the Federal Reserve is on the early stages of restoring more normal monetary policy. I grew up in an era in which Federal Reserve governors, central bankers took great pains to not be understood. Alan Greenspan could speak for 90 minutes and you have no idea what he said. Jay Powell and his immediate predecessors, Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke, have taken a different tack. And I think they view communication as part of the tools in the Federal Reserve toolbox. So in a speech to the IMF earlier this week, when asked a direct question about monetary policy, you can read the quote yourself. Jay Powell said 50 basis points is on the table for the May meeting. That's next Wednesday, by the way. And the market is taking him at his word. If we look at the futures market for the Fed funds rate, so think of this as short-term interest rates, the market is pricing in a 50 basis point rate hike at the May meeting, and then another 50 basis points at the June meeting, and then another 50 basis points at the July meeting. So that's the step function you see in this graph. That would indicate ending the year, and this is as of a couple of days ago, the red bar is the end of the year, 2.72% Fed funds rate. So that looks a little alarming because that looks like higher interest rates. The scale of this is important. 2.7% is not an economy backbreaking level of interest rates. Furthermore, if you look at the last 3 bars, that's the futures market expectation for year end 2023, 4, and 5. So what the futures market is saying is that yes, the Fed has to raise interest rates, but they're kind of going to get it all done this year. What I think is informing the Fed, and they will never say this, but I will say this. I think behind closed doors, the Fed says, you know, a little over 2 years ago, in response to an unprecedented impairment of economic activity, we had to put into place emergency monetary policy, slashing interest rates to 0, all kinds of other backstops to economic activity and market activity. Now that that emergency has passed, and everyone knocks on wood when we say that, maybe we should remove the emergency level of monetary support. Prior to the onset of the pandemic, the Fed funds rate was about 1.75%. I think most of what you see here is the Fed simply removing that emergency level of policy. My own opinion is that this overstates the necessity for the Fed to raise interest rates. I think the market is expecting too much tightening and we will not get this much. Again, someone will write this down and tell me I was wrong a year from now. But I think as the year goes on and as inflation begins to decline, yes, the Fed may raise interest rates 50 basis points over the next 3 meetings, but then may step back from the table and say, okay, let's see what the state of play is now. Right now, we're looking at 8.5% inflation. That's kind of scary. But I think in 3 or 4 or 5 months from now, that picture will look different. But the public markets have begun to price a lot of that in. So what you're looking at now are standard good old-fashioned yield curves. So the rate of return, the interest rate on government-issued treasuries from 1 month at the left-hand side all the way out to 30 years. The red line is the beginning of 2021. That's a while ago now. The blue line is the beginning of this year. The green line is where we are at present. You could spend a career in financial markets and never see a yield curve like that green line. That is really unusual. The way to read that is to read that very steep increase is, as I've already referred to, the Fed having to do a lot of work right now, this year. And so the 2-year bond, 2 years out, is already pricing in a whole lot of Fed tightening. The flatness beyond that is the market saying, but you know what, then they're kind of done. After that, they don't need to do much more. So longer dated treasuries, 2 years all the way out to 30 years, aren't pricing in as much inflationary pressure or as much Fed tightening. Now, one way to interpret this, and you've seen a lot of this over the past few days, a lot of financial analysts look at that and say, oh, I know what that yield curve looks like. That's a recession. When the yield curve flattens like that, or even inverts and the long end tips down a little bit, that's an early indication of a recession. If you go back and look at the data, that's not necessarily true, but this week we got some indications that maybe the economy is not as strong as we thought. The first quarter GDP number had a negative sign in front of it. I'm sorry to cause maybe a little bit of a flashback to freshman year of economics, but I want to just remind you how we calculate GDP. It's 4 variables. It's a pretty simple equation. So GDP is personal consumption, that's you, plus private domestic investment, that's business spending, household formation, household business, residential real estate, all those kind of things, plus government spending, plus net exports. And it's net because imports are someone else's GDP. So we take exports minus imports, and that's the net. If you look at how that breaks down, not all of those variables are created equally, and I've already referred to this. Personal consumption is 68%. That's the important part. These other things move up and down. Personal consumption is the one that we really have to watch. And here, when we look at the first quarter of this year, the economy wasn't as weak as the headline number might imply. So let's look now at the contribution to GDP growth, not the composition of, but contribution to. So this is the last 5 quarters. This is all of 2021. The very right-hand side is going to be a cluster of bars that looks at the contribution to the first quarter, the quarter we just ended. The green bar here is personal consumption. All those bars point up. They don't all point up the same, but personal spending has been a contributor to GDP growth for each of the past 5 quarters. The blue bar here is private investment. And here there's a little bit more cyclicality. Early in 2021, it was negative. It really jumped in the fourth quarter of last year. In the fourth quarter of last year, business spending added over 5% to GDP. Put a pin in that. I'm going to come back to that. Net exports is the mustard line. Those are all negative. And the reason they're negative is because our imports into a relatively robust demand structure is greater than our exports. That's actually a pretty common pattern. Look how far that fell in the first quarter. Put a pin in that. I'm going to come back to that as well. The light blue bar is government spending. That's actually not as much as people tend to think it is. And if you add all of those bars up, you get the red bar. The red bar is headline GDP. That on the very right-hand side is the negative 1.4% that we saw for the first quarter of this year. That caught a lot of people off guard, and it gave a lot of fuel to those people who were saying, the economy is already in recession, and just nobody knows it. In reality, what happened was in the fourth quarter of last year, businesses built up a lot of inventory. There was a lot of optimism about economic activity, coupled with concerns about supply chains. So put yourself in the mind of a business owner or manager. I know that's not difficult for this crowd. If you're unclear about your supply chains and the reliability thereof, you wind up with more inventory because you're not sure if you're going to be able to get it on short notice. A lot of that inventory build did not recur in the first quarter. When you look over your shoulder and the warehouse is full, that's when you say, slow down a little bit. So not surprisingly, in the first quarter of this year, the demand for inventory builds slowed down, but the ultimate personal demand for spending didn't. And what made that up is imports. Those 3 things together are really the narrative of the first quarter of this year. You just get these big inventory swings. To me, the important thing that I watch is the behavior of that green line. As long as personal consumption is healthy, that's the heartbeat of the US economy. The rumors of the demise of this economic cycle are greatly exaggerated. The final thing that I want to look at, and this was that silver lining transition to which I referred, is this surge in economic productivity. What I've done here is a very simple measure. It's a measure of GDP per worker. That's it. That's the only measure. And you can see that over the past year and a half or 2 years, there's been a rather sharp rise in that. What you're looking at here is basically the quantification of the old adage that necessity is the mother of invention. It really is. We've had to make up a lot of stuff over the past 2 years. We've learned a lot about flexibility, working remote, whatever it is, and we're not going to forget those lessons when life gets back to normal. This is not unprecedented. We've seen this before. It tends to occur during periods of economic stress, not surprisingly. Coming out of the global financial crisis, the earlier circle on the page, we saw a similar rise in productivity that lingered. There was no reversion to the mean. I think we're seeing the same thing this time around as well. Not only is this a tailwind to corporate earnings, not only is it a tailwind to economic activity, this is actually another one of those disinflationary trends. Productivity and efficiency is the ultimate disinflationary trend. My final slide I want to look at is what I have found to be the best measure of nearer term economic activity. And it is the aptly named Index of Leading Economic Indicators. There's a lot built into this. There's a lot of sub-indices built into this. It's short-term interest rates, it's the labor market, it's the housing market, it's bank lending. It's a number of things that are all intended to provide some insight into nearer term economic activity. So a couple of quarters out at most. As a long-term forecasting tool, guess what? There isn't one for the economy. But in the near term, couple of quarters, which as we sit here in practically May is essentially the rest of this year, this is a pretty good indicator. What's really important is the year-over-year change. The red line here is just the year-over-year change in the blue line, and the red shaded bars are periods of economic recession. So what you can see is that prior to the onset of a recession, in every case, not only is the index of leading economic indicators in decline, it's kind of unambiguously in decline. There's no debating it. Where we are right now, the index itself, the blue line, is at an all-time high. The red line, the year-over-year change, is growing 7 or 8% a year. The near-term possibility of an economic recession in this country is rather low. There's too much growth in the labor market. There's too much growth in wages. There's too much personal demand. That's 68% of GDP. Next year could be a different story. Next year is going to be a different environment. Interest rates are going to be higher. We'll see how far the Fed raises interest rates. I don't have a crystal ball that goes out that far. Nobody does. But at least for the near term, the doom and gloom that you sometimes read about the economy being in recession already or heading towards it in the near term is vastly overstated. So be of good cheer and courage. I think what we'll see across the course of this year is the ripple effects of the pandemic will continue to reverberate. All these economic transitions, all in the inflationary indications, all the monetary policy indications will continue to reverberate over the course of this year. Let me end in with just a really brief comment on financial markets. Investors do not like uncertainty, and there's a lot of uncertainty. The transition in economic leadership, monetary policy, there's a midterm election in this country in November of this year. There is plenty to be anxious about. That's the source of all the volatility that we're seeing in financial markets, and I don't think it's going to go away. Won't go away until some of these uncertainties clarify themselves. My final point here, to an investor who takes an active approach, I'm preaching my own book in saying this, to someone who seeks to exploit the difference between price and value in securities, the more differentiation there is between price and value, the more opportunities there are. So although price volatility is never a pleasant state of affairs, for someone who is a disciplined, long-term, patient investor who could ignore the day-to-day market volatility, which is always there, markets have always been volatile, and stay focused on the longer-term value that underlies all that volatility, that's the secret to success. That's exactly what Warren Buffett is telling everyone in Omaha today. So you heard it from me, you could hear it from Uncle Warren as well. With that, let me come to an end. That is my contact information again. And I am not rushing off if anybody has any questions, but I also see Bob lingering with a microphone. So I'll take one or two now if you have time.
Scott, I enjoy your presentation. Larry Summers if he was standing in front of us right now, would probably have given us the exact opposite approach. I mean, yours is very optimistic. What kind of data does he have that you don't have, or vice versa?
You know, it's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I do spend a lot of time thinking about if I'm wrong, what does being wrong look like? How could I turn out to be over optimistic? Here's what I think that looks like. Inflation is always the intersection of supply and demand. Whether it's of one good or the overall economy, it's supply and demand. I am reasonably confident that the demand part of that equation is waning. Pent-up demand, by definition, once it's met, doesn't exist anymore. So if you've put off replacing the refrigerator for the past year and a half and you finally do it, you're not going to go buy another refrigerator next week. So I think the demand side of the inflationary pressure is already waning. The supply side, on the other hand, because of Russia, Ukraine, China, disruptions, I mean, again, I don't need to tell this audience about that. That's not waning as quickly. So if I'm wrong, there is extended inflationary pressure to which the Fed responds by raising interest rates more quickly or further than they otherwise would. Here's the bad news there. Although the Fed, by raising interest rates, can put downward pressure on demand, the Fed cannot do a thing about the war in Ukraine. The Fed cannot do a thing about opening up Shanghai and Guangzhou province. The Fed can't solve supply issues. So if the Fed becomes so tunnel vision on inflation that they forget to ask where the inflation is coming from, they could wind up over tightening. in pushing demand down so far that you do get a rather sharp recession beginning of next year, let's say. That is not my base case. That is not my expectation. I think the Fed is smarter than that. But if I wanted to paint the negative picture, I would say the Fed doesn't have a good grasp on the origins of inflation, and for that reason is going to tighten monetary policy more rapidly than they should. Again, I don't expect that, but I think a lot of the people who are expecting a lot more economic weakness than I am are attributing it to that kind of dynamic.
Okay, any other questions? John?
Hi. It seems we've gone through 10 years of financialization of everything, and we're getting out of zero interest rates, we're getting out of QE and all that. Clearly, assets are priced completely in a different world than where we're heading. So what impact do you think stocks, housing, whatever, if Main Street is getting its money back with productivity as opposed to Wall Street, what impact's that going to have on spending?
It has a lot of impacts, and so yes, I believe we are entering a period of more reasonable interest rates. And I'm old school in the belief that I think money ought to have a value to it. I know that's terribly old fashioned of me, but there ought to be a price for money. Money market funds ought to have a yield. I mean, again, I'm old fashioned in saying that, and it's been a while since they have been. Some of my younger colleagues laugh at me when I remind them that in the summer of 2007, money markets in the United States yielded 5.5%. They look at me like I'm an old guy talking about nickel cokes down at the deli, but that's not that long ago. So I welcome that because I think we have been for 15 years without a real price discovery mechanism in financial markets, and we're getting back to that. I'm not sure we get all the way back to that. But in financial markets, where the present value of anything is a concept that is a discounted present value of future cash flows, if your discount rate rises, the calculated present value drops. A big reason why we've seen the volatility in the markets, and particularly in growth stocks, is that discount rate has risen, and that's brought down the present value of those companies. I welcome that. I think markets ought to be more rational than they are. So to answer your question, I think going forward, if we're genuinely in a period of more reasonable interest rates, and that can mean 3 or 4%, it doesn't have to be 7 or 8. That is a dampener on spending. That is a dampener on equity valuations. It is a return to more reality from the last 15 years that's been financially engineered. I don't think that has to be 15 years of foregone returns. I think what it is, though, is that the rising tide that made pretty much every security look cheap and look investable, I think that goes away. And if I can quote Warren Buffett, when the tide goes out, he has observed on more than one occasion, you find out who's been swimming without a swimming suit on. So higher interest rates makes some of these weaker business models very evident. And I think that's the kind of environment that we're headed into. We're not there yet, because as we sit here today, although people are widely expecting the Fed to raise interest rates quite a lot, the Fed funds rate at yesterday, at least, was 32 basis points. So interest rates have not really moved up yet, but they're on the verge of doing so. And that's likely to be the source of a lot more volatility.
Thanks for the presentation. I have a question. There is a how do you foresee impact of the cryptocurrency, the impact of the potential de-dollarization of the international or global economy, where you have a pressure on the dollar from China, from other countries that are trying to weave away from the dollar? Where do you see that? How is that going to impact the dollar rate, the interest rates here in the United States?
I have about a 4-hour answer to that question. The widely touted argument behind cryptocurrencies in general, and I'm going to do it disservice, but the beauty of it is it's decentralized and there is no central bank behind it creating the value of it. That's held forth as an appeal of cryptocurrencies. I think that misstates where the real source of a currency's value comes from. The value of the dollar does not come from Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve. It comes from the fact that it is the underlying currency of the biggest economy on the face of the planet. Not to mention all the other economies that also use it, not to mention the global trade, which is priced in dollars. That's the value of the dollar. So if that were to change, if all of a sudden we were to start quoting oil in euros instead of dollars, or a wide range of commodities, yeah, I would begin to wonder whether or not the dollar was losing its reserve status. But I think we're a long way away from that. I don't know what the legitimate competitor is of the US dollar. If I had to bet, maybe the euro down the road, but way down the road, it's not the yen, it's not the British pound after Brexit, it's not the renminbi, which raises the issue of cryptocurrencies. Is it potentially a cryptocurrency? Here too, I think the answer is no. And I will readily admit, I'm an increasingly older guy focused on the past. So, I'm willing to believe that I just don't quote get it. But when I think about what it takes for something to be a currency, it has to be a unit of value, a means of exchange, and a unit of measurement. And right now, there's not a single cryptocurrency that meets any of those definitions. As long as the price of Bitcoin is $38,000, the dollar is the unit of measurement. And I know there are companies that take Bitcoin. I know you can go buy a Tesla using Bitcoin, but what does Tesla then do with the Bitcoin? They turn it into dollars because their costs are in dollars. So as a limited use, now let me be clear, the underlying technology, the blockchain technology that supports a lot of these cryptocurrencies, that's for real. Some of you may be using this already. It has wide applications in trade. And so for that reason, I think that there is a rationale for cryptocurrencies to exist. They have a function, largely driven by the underlying blockchain, and Bitcoin and Ethereum would be the two that I would look at as having the strongest case statement. But it's a long way to go from saying Bitcoin and Ethereum have limited case use to they're going to replace the US dollar. I do not see that happening anytime soon. If anything, and now I'm going to make a near-term forecast, the way in which the Fed is about to embark on much more higher interest rates, as opposed to a lot of other central banks around the world, is a near-term tailwind for the dollar. And again, you've already seen that just in the past couple of months. Depending on what currency you're trading in, the dollar is up 5, 10, 15% against a basket of currencies. That's that anticipation of the Fed in the near term. In the longer run, I just don't see what the competition is on the global economy to the dollar as the currency of choice for any kind of global trade.
Okay, seeing no more questions, I think it is time to wrap up. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Scott.
all.
It's always a pleasure having you. Okay, so quick note on the boat cruise for tonight. If you're reserved, Erin will have the details, and if you'd like to be added, check with her about space. And then what we're going to do is get right into the Nut and Ag section meeting. So we'll get that underway in about 2 minutes, I think. So.
Yeah.
All right.